Tonight, we step into the strange, delicious, and genuinely dangerous world of the royal food taster. Not those dignified servants from costume dramas standing elegantly beside kings. Think more nervous sweating, careful sips, and the constant knowledge that your next meal might be your last. The real job was less honor, more human guinea pig, and the difference between a normal day and a funeral was as thin as a pinch of arsenic in the wine. Forget what Hollywood has shown you. So let's see how this job came to be, what kept tasters alive, and what a royal banquet felt like when any dish could be your last. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like a video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always interesting to see who's joining us. Now dim the lights, close your eyes, and get comfortable. We're getting started. Think about this strange job you now hold standing between a ruler and potential death, using your own body as a testing ground for poison. Where did this profession even come from? Who decided that some people should risk their lives just to make sure food is safe? The practice goes back thousands of years, far older than Renaissance Florence. Ancient Roman emperors were among the first to employ official food tasters, called pregustators. Emperor Claudius, who ruled Rome in the 1st century, had an entire team of tasters working in shifts. The job was considered important enough that some pregustators came from respectable families, not just slaves. They received good pay and special privileges in exchange for the constant risk. Why did emperors need this protection? Roman politics was brutal. Rivals, ambitious generals, even family members might use poison to seize power. Poison was quiet, hard to trace, and could be blamed on natural illness. A sudden death from bad digestion raised fewer questions than an obvious assassination. Food tasters became necessary insurance against this invisible threat. The practice spread throughout medieval Europe as kingdoms formed and power struggles intensified. By the 1200s, most European courts employed at least one official taster. French kings had them. English monarchs used them. German princes kept them. Spanish nobility hired them. Anywhere power and wealth concentrated, food tasters appeared as a standard precaution. The requirements for the job varied by location and era. Some courts preferred young men in their teens or early 20s, healthy, with strong constitutions that might survive mild poisoning. Others wanted older, experienced servants who understood court politics and could spot suspicious behavior. A few rulers hired multiple tasters, rotating them to reduce the chance that all could be bribed simultaneously. Physical health was the primary requirement everywhere. Courts examined potential tasters carefully before hiring. Weak stomachs, existing illnesses, poor eyesight, any of these could disqualify a candidate. A job required someone who could detect subtle changes in taste and smell, and whose body would show clear symptoms quickly if poison was present. Training methods differed significantly between courts. Some places offered extensive instruction, weeks of learning about common poisons, their tastes and effects, proper antidote procedures, which foods posed higher risks. Experienced tasters taught newcomers how to sip wine properly, testing different parts of the cup where poison might concentrate. They explained how to check bread for unusual moisture or odd coloring that might indicate tampering. Other courts provided almost no training. You simply started the job and learned through experience if you survived long enough. This approach had obvious drawbacks. Many new tasters died within their first months because they didn't recognize warning signs until too late. But from the ruler's perspective, the system worked. As long as someone tested the food first, the ruler stayed safe, regardless of whether that someone lived or died. The social status of food tasters occupied a strange middle ground. They weren't nobility. Most came from common backgrounds like yours. But they also weren't ordinary servants. The job required trust and proximity to power. Tasters saw private meals, heard confidential conversations, observed political meetings that other servants never witnessed. This access made them valuable, but also vulnerable. Knowledge could be dangerous for people without protection. Pay reflected this ambiguous status. Wages were significantly better than typical servant positions, often 3 to 5 times what kitchen workers or stable hands earned. Some courts provided additional benefits: better sleeping quarters, nicer clothing, occasional gifts from grateful rulers who survived assassination attempts. A few tasters even received small land, grants or pensions after years of faithful service. But money couldn't fully compensate for the risks. Life expectancy for food tasters was notoriously short. Records from various European courts suggest most lasted only 2 to 3 years before dying, becoming too ill to continue, or fleeing to safer work. The lucky ones retired with their health intact and their savings sufficient to start new lives elsewhere. These success stories were rare enough to be noteworthy. Different courts developed different protocols for the tasting process itself. At the French royal court, tasters sampled food in a special side chamber before meals, waiting a specific period, usually 15 to 20 minutes, to see if symptoms appeared. English practice involved tasting food directly at the table, immediately before the king ate, creating dramatic tension at every meal. German courts sometimes employed 2 tasters who worked simultaneously, each testing different portions to prevent either from being bribed to approve poisoned food while pretending to test it. The relationship between tasters and rulers varied enormously. Some monarchs treated their tasters as valued protectors, learning their names, inquiring about their families, rewarding loyal service generously. These rulers understood that a taster who felt respected and well compensated was less likely to accept bribes from assassins. Other rulers viewed tasters as disposable tools, barely acknowledging their existence, replacing them without comment when they died. You've heard stories about famous tasters from Marco and other palace servants. There was Gustav, who served a German prince for 12 years, and supposedly survived 4 actual poisoning attempts. His constitution so strong that he recovered from doses that should have killed him. There was Isabella, one of the few female tasters in history, who worked for an Italian duchess and became so skilled at detecting poisons that she could identify specific toxins by taste alone. There was Thomas, an English taster who discovered a poison plot, revealed the conspirators, and was rewarded with a knighthood, an almost unheard of honor for someone of common birth. But for every success story, there are dozens of forgotten names. Tasters who died quietly were buried without ceremony and were replaced within days. The profession attracted desperate people, those who had no better options, who gambled their lives against the hope of steady meals and a warm bed. People exactly like you. The profession began declining in the 1600s as political systems stabilized and poison became less common as an assassination method. Improved food safety practices, better understanding of toxins, and changing attitudes about governance all contributed. By the 1700s, most European courts had abandoned the practice entirely. A few conservative monarchs maintained tasters out of tradition rather than necessity. But the golden age of the profession had passed. Yet during its peak in the Ensemble, 1400s and 1500s, the era you're living through, now food tasters were an essential part of court life. Every major ruler employed them. Every political banquet required them. Every diplomatic dinner involved them. The profession existed at the intersection of cuisine, politics, and survival, turning ordinary eating into a potentially deadly act as you lie in your servants' quarters recovering from that poisoned wine. You're part of this long, strange tradition. Thousands of people before you have held this same position, faced these same dangers, made these same calculations about whether survival was possible. Some succeeded. Most didn't. Your story is still being written, and the ending remains uncertain. The history of your profession is the history of power itself, how it attracts enemies, how it requires protection, how it consumes ordinary people in its endless struggles. You didn't choose this path out of ambition or loyalty. You chose it out of hunger and desperation. But now you're part of something larger, a profession that has existed for centuries and will likely continue long after you're gone. Tomorrow brings another day of tasting, another round of testing food for invisible threats. The history continues, and you're living it one dangerous meal at a time. The palace kitchen is its own universe, a hot, crowded realm that operates from before sunrise until long after midnight. As food taster, you spend more hours here than anywhere else, watching every ingredient that enters, every hand that touches food destined for the Duke's table. What once seemed like simple cooking now reveals itself as complex theater, where every spice, every technique, every choice carries meaning. Head cook Salvatore commands this domain. He's a large man from Naples who learned his craft in the kitchens of cardinals and counts before coming to Florence. His reputation draws nobles from across Italy who want to taste his famous sauces and elaborate meat preparations. But fame creates its own problems. A cook this skilled might be bribed by enemies or threatened by rivals. You watch him constantly, noting how he personally tastes every major dish before it leaves the kitchen. The kitchen staff numbers about 40 people, working in organized hierarchy. 5 assistant cooks report directly to Salvatore, each managing different areas. Giovanni handles all meat preparation, butchering fresh game from hunting expeditions, roasting whole pigs for feasts, preparing delicate poultry dishes. Maria supervises bread and vegetables, transforming basic ingredients into elaborate presentations. Antonio manages the critical sauce station, working with spices worth more than most people earn in years. Below the assistant cooks work a dozen kitchen servants who do the heavy labor hauling water, stoking fires, scrubbing pots, carrying supplies up from storage cellars. Another dozen scullery workers handle the endless washing and cleaning. Everyone has specific roles, specific responsibilities. This organization helps with security. You know who should be touching which foods, who belongs in which areas. Anyone out of place draws immediate attention. The ingredients themselves tell stories of global trade and immense wealth. Pepper arrives via Venetian, merchants who control the spice routes from India and Southeast Asia. Small pouches cost what a worker might earn in months. Black pepper, white pepper, long pepper, each variety has different uses, different values. The kitchen keeps them locked in special cabinets, doling out measured amounts for important dishes only. Saffron comes from Spain and the Eastern Mediterranean, harvested from crocus flowers by hand. It takes thousands of flowers to produce a single ounce. The distinctive yellow-red threads cost more than silver by weight. Head cook Salvatore personally controls the saffron supply, keeping it in a locked box in his private quarters. When recipes require saffron, he measures it himself, allowing no one else to touch it. Sugar remains rare and precious, arriving on ships from Sicily or distant Atlantic islands. Most Europeans still use honey for sweetening, making sugar a luxury that displays wealth and status. The Duke's banquets feature elaborate sugar sculptures, castles, animals, mythological scenes that serve as centerpieces before being carefully preserved for future display. These sugar works cost small fortunes, combining expensive material with skilled artistry. Salt, despite being common, requires careful attention. The palace uses 2 types: coarse gray salt for general cooking and fine white salt for the Duke's personal dishes. Both arrive from coastal salt works in sealed containers. You've learned to check salt carefully because certain poisons look remarkably similar to salt crystals. A quick substitution could turn a harmless seasoning into a deadly one. The meat supplies come from multiple sources. Game arrives from the Duke's hunting estates: wild boar, deer, rabbits, various birds. Domestic animals come from contracted farmers who raise pigs, sheep, chickens, specifically for the palace. Fish arrives several times weekly from coastal towns, packed in ice and straw for the journey inland. You inspect all of it, looking for unusual coloring, strange odors, anything that suggests tampering or contamination. Vegetables and fruits arrive daily from nearby farms and orchards. Spring brings tender greens and early berries. Summer provides abundance: tomatoes, melons, stone fruits, endless varieties of produce. Fall delivers chestnuts, mushrooms, root vegetables for storage. Winter limits options to preserved and stored foods. The seasonal rhythms dictate menu planning, with Salvatore adapting dishes to whatever ingredients peak at each moment. Wine deserves special attention. The palace maintains extensive cellars, holding hundreds of barrels from different regions and vintages. Tuscan wines dominate, but special occasions call for imports from France, Spain, even Greece. Each barrel gets checked when it arrives. You personally taste samples from different depths, since poison might settle or rise depending on its properties. Once approved, barrels are sealed with the Duke's mark. Anyone breaking that seal without authorization faces immediate investigation. The kitchen's daily rhythm follows strict patterns. Work begins before dawn, when fires are lit and bread dough is started. By the time you arrive for breakfast inspection, the kitchen is already hot and busy. You move through designated stations, checking ingredients for the morning meal. Bread dough rising in wooden balls. Cheese brought up from cool storage. Fruits washed and arranged. Everything gets visual inspection first. Then selected items get tasted. Mid-morning brings preparation for the main meal at midday. This requires coordination among all stations. Meat needs hours of roasting. Sauces must be started early to develop proper flavors. Vegetables get prepared in sequence, so everything finishes simultaneously. You circulate constantly, watching processes, checking additions, tasting works in progress. The afternoon offers brief quiet before evening meal preparations begin. This is when you can actually talk with kitchen staff, learning their techniques and concerns. Maria teaches you about dangerous plants that resemble safe ones, certain mushrooms that cause illness, berries that look edible but aren't. Giovanni explains how to judge meat quality, what good color and smell indicate versus signs of problems. Evening preparations are most elaborate, especially when the Duke entertains guests. Multiple courses require careful orchestration. Salvatore directs like a military commander, calling out timing, checking presentations, tasting everything. You stay close during these crucial hours, knowing that important banquets create prime opportunities for poison attempts when multiple dishes and distractions provide cover. The kitchen has its own culture and tensions. Competition exists between stations. Meat cooks consider themselves superior to vegetable workers. Sauce makers view everyone else as mere assistants. Salvatore must manage these egos while maintaining production standards. Arguments erupt over technique, ingredients, credit for successful dishes. You stay out of these conflicts, focusing solely on safety issues, but you've learned that kitchen politics matter for security. A resentful assistant might be more vulnerable to bribes from outside enemies. Someone passed over for promotion might accept payment to look away during critical moments. Understanding these dynamics helps you identify who might pose risks, who seems too eager to please visitors, who displays suspicious nervousness around certain ingredients. The physical environment itself creates challenges. The heat is intense, especially in summer. Multiple cooking fires blazing simultaneously in enclosed spaces. Workers sweat constantly, drink water frequently, take breaks outside when possible. This constant motion and discomfort makes it harder to maintain vigilant attention. Mistakes happen more easily when everyone is tired and uncomfortable. Storage areas below the kitchen hold enormous quantities, sacks of flour and grains, barrels of wine and oil, hanging cured meats, shelves of preserved foods. These areas require regular inspection too. A poison introduced into storage could contaminate supplies for days before being discovered. You've started making random checks, appearing unannounced to examine storage conditions and verify that only authorized people have access. The kitchen exists at the intersection of art, craft, and potential danger. Every meal represents hours of skilled labor using expensive ingredients from around the known world. But every meal also represents opportunity for those who wish the Duke harm. Your job is to stand at that intersection, protecting one while appreciating the other. As you finish another day of kitchen monitoring, you understand better how food connects to everything: trade, wealth, politics, power. The Duke's table displays his status and generosity, but it also exposes his vulnerability. And you stand between those two realities, one careful taste at a time. Every profession has its risks, but yours involves literally putting dangerous substances into your body to protect someone else. Understanding these dangers and learning protection methods makes the difference between surviving this job and becoming another forgotten name in palace records. The primary threat comes from various substances that can be added to food or drink. Medieval courts face a wide range of potential dangers, some from natural sources, others created through deliberate preparation. As a taster, you need to recognize warning signs quickly, often within seconds of consumption. Bitter substances present the most common category. Many dangerous compounds share a characteristic bitterness that differs from normal food flavors. This bitterness often appears at the back of the throat rather than on the front of the tongue. Training yourself to detect this specific sensation is the first line of defense. When you taste wine or food and notice unusual bitterness, you immediately stop and alert others. Metallic tastes provide another warning sign. Certain substances, particularly those containing metal compounds, create distinctive metallic sensations in the mouth. This differs completely from normal food flavors. The taste resembles what you might experience touching copper or iron to your tongue. Any metallic quality in food or drink requires immediate investigation. Texture changes can indicate problems too. Liquids that seem thicker or more viscous than expected might contain added substances. Wine that feels oily, water that seems slightly syrupy, sauces with unexpected consistency, all warrant suspicion. Your tongue and palate become instruments for detecting these subtle variations. Visual inspection comes before tasting. You examine food carefully for unusual colors, unexpected particles, surface films on liquids, or separation in normally uniform preparations. Bread with odd spotting, wine with strange cloudiness, meat with peculiar discoloration, any of these triggers closer examination before you risk tasting. Smell provides crucial information. Many dangerous substances have distinctive odors, though some are deliberately made odorless to avoid detection. You've learned to smell food from different angles and distances. Sometimes dangerous additions smell fine from above, but reveal themselves when you smell from the side of a plate or from below a cup. The timing of symptoms matters enormously. Some substances act quickly, within minutes. Others take hours to show effects. The 15-minute waiting period after tasting exists because most fast-acting dangers reveal themselves within that window. But you've learned to pay attention to your body for several hours after each tasting session, noting any unusual sensations, stomach discomfort, headaches, dizziness, numbness. Court physicians and alchemists provide essential knowledge about protection methods. The palace employs an old physician named Dr. Benetti, who has studied dangerous substances for decades. He teaches you about different categories of threats and their characteristic symptoms. Plant-based dangers come from numerous sources. Certain mushrooms, berries, and leaves contain natural compounds that cause illness. Dr. Benetti shows you dried specimens, teaching you to recognize dangerous plants that might be ground into powders or infused into liquids. Belladonna, wolfsbane, hemlock. These names become familiar through his lessons. The universal antidote you carry, a small vial of thick, brownish liquid, represents centuries of medical knowledge. Called theriac or treacle, this substance contains dozens of ingredients mixed according to ancient recipes. Dr. Benetti explains that it works against some threats by absorbing dangerous compounds, neutralizing acids, or counteracting specific effects on the body. The theriac tastes terrible, intensely bitter, with dozens of clashing herbal flavors. But you've practiced drinking it quickly during training sessions. Speed matters. The antidote works best when taken immediately after recognizing a problem. Minutes of delay can mean the difference between recovery and serious harm. The vial stays with you constantly, tucked inside your shirt against your chest where you can reach it instantly. You check it multiple times daily to ensure the wax seal remains intact and the liquid hasn't leaked. The palace provides fresh supplies monthly, since the mixture loses potency over time. Beyond the antidote, other protection methods exist. Induced vomiting can expel dangerous substances before they're fully absorbed. The palace keeps specific herbs and preparations designed to trigger rapid stomach emptying. These work best within the first few minutes after consumption. You've practiced this procedure during training. It's unpleasant, but effective. Activated charcoal serves as another defensive tool. Ground into fine powder, charcoal can bind to many dangerous substances in the stomach, preventing absorption. The palace kitchen keeps supplies ready. After any suspicious tasting, you might consume charcoal mixed with water as a precautionary measure. Milk appears frequently in protective protocols. The old belief holds that milk can dilute or neutralize certain dangers. While not effective against everything, it does help with some acidic substances or irritating compounds. The kitchen always has fresh milk available for emergency use. Dr. Benetti teaches you to recognize your own body's warning signals. Different substances cause different patterns of symptoms. Numbness beginning in the lips and spreading to the face suggests one category of danger. Sudden intense stomach cramping indicates another. Rapid heartbeat with sweating points to yet another. Learning these patterns helps. You respond appropriately rather than panicking. The physician also emphasizes the importance of immediate communication. The instant you recognize something wrong, you must alert others, even if you feel embarrassed about false alarms. False alarms are infinitely better than failed warnings. Every survival depends on quick response. Prevention remains better than treatment. You've learned numerous preventive practices during your months as taster. Watching who has access to food at every stage, from delivery through storage, through preparation, through serving. Noting changes in routine or unexpected people in sensitive areas. Questioning anything unusual without apologizing for vigilance. Sealing methods provide physical barriers. Wine barrels get marked with official seals that break if tampered with. Special containers for valuable spices use wax seals that show any unauthorized opening. Locked storage for the most precious or dangerous ingredients keeps materials under strict control. You verify these seals constantly. Redundancy creates safety margins. Multiple people handle and check food at different stages. If someone misses something, others might catch it. If one person is bribed or threatened, others remain vigilant. This layered approach reduces the chance that danger gets through all barriers. Your relationship with kitchen staff matters for protection too. When people trust you and understand you're protecting everyone, not just the Duke, they become more willing to share information. A servant who notices something odd but feels intimidated might stay quiet. But that same person might tell you if you've built rapport and shown respect for their expertise. Some dangers have no good defenses. Certain rare substances work so quickly and effectively that no antidote helps. These exist mainly in stories and rumors, but the possibility creates background anxiety that never fully disappears. You accept this risk as part of the job. Some dangers simply cannot be stopped, only recognized and reported after they've done their damage. Weather and seasons affect danger levels too. Summer heat makes food spoil faster, creating natural dangers that mimic deliberate poisoning. You've learned to distinguish between contamination from spoilage versus deliberate addition of harmful substances. Both make you sick, but the responses differ. One requires better kitchen protocols. The other demands investigation of criminal activity. Political situations raise or lower risk levels. When tensions run high between rival families, or when important negotiations are underway, or when foreign dignitaries visit, these times require extra vigilance. Conversely, Quiet periods with routine meals and no significant events pose lower risks. You calibrate your attention accordingly. Physical conditioning helps surprisingly. Good health, adequate sleep, proper nutrition all make your body more resilient and better able to detect problems. Ironically, your job of tasting rich food provides excellent nutrition, probably better than you'd ever eat otherwise. This advantage helps you stay alert and healthy enough to do the work effectively. Mental preparation matters too. Fear can be paralyzing or protective, depending on how you manage it. You've learned to channel fear into focused attention rather than panic. Every tasting requires calm assessment, quick thinking if problems arise, and trust in your training and tools. Documentation provides security benefits beyond immediate protection. You keep mental notes of every unusual incident, every suspicious moment, every false alarm. These patterns sometimes reveal larger pictures, repeated attempts by the same people, specific times when problems cluster, particular ingredients that show up in multiple incidents. Information accumulates into understanding. The protection. Methods you've learned represent centuries of accumulated knowledge from countless tasters before you. Some survived to pass on their wisdom. Others discovered what didn't work through final mistakes. You benefit from all this history, standing on the experience of those who came before. As you prepare for tomorrow's tastings, you check your antidote vial, review the warning signs Dr. Benetti taught you, and mentally prepare for whatever might come. The dangers are real and constant, but so are the methods for confronting them. You're not defenseless, you're trained, equipped, and as prepared as this profession allows anyone to be. The game continues. And you're still in it. Your life has fallen into patterns since taking this position 6 months ago. The job defines your entire existence now, where you sleep, when you wake, what you eat, who you interact with. Understanding this daily rhythm helps explain what it truly means to be a food taster at a Renaissance court. You wake before dawn, earlier than most palace residents, except the kitchen staff who light the cooking fires. Your sleeping quarters are in the servants' wing, a long room divided by wooden partitions where 8 other servants sleep on narrow beds with thin mattresses stuffed with straw. The room stays cold in winter, despite a small fireplace at one end. Summer brings the opposite problem. Heat, rising from the kitchens below, makes the space stifling. The other servants sharing your room work various positions. 2 are stable hands who care for the Duke's horses. 1 manages the Duke's hunting dogs. 3 work as general household servants, cleaning and carrying. 1 serves as assistant to the Duke's personal valet. Another works in the wine cellars. This mixing of different roles is typical. The palace doesn't separate servants by job type, just by general status level. Your bed sits near the window, a spot you claimed early in your tenure. The window provides fresh air and natural light, both precious commodities in crowded servants' quarters. A wooden chest at the foot of your bed holds your few possessions. 2 changes of clothing provided by the palace. The leather pouch of saved coins. A few personal items from your life before. The antidote vial stays tucked in your shirt day and night, never stored in the chest where it might be tampered with. Morning routine begins around 5 o'clock when bells ring for early prayers. You're not required to attend chapel services like some servants, but you use that quiet hour to prepare for the day. Washing from a communal basin of cold water. Dressing in your work clothes, simple but clean, better quality than what you wore on the streets. Checking the antidote vial seal. Mental preparation for whatever the day might bring. By 6 o'clock, you're in the kitchen for breakfast preparations. This timing never varies. The Duke eats his first meal at 7, which means food must be ready for your inspection by 6:30. You move through the stations checking bread fresh from the ovens, cheese brought up from cool storage, fruits selected for the morning table. Small tastes of each item, waiting 5 minutes, watching for any warning signs from your body. If everything seems safe, You report to the steward who oversees the Duke's household. He notes your approval and food proceeds upstairs to the Duke's private chambers. You don't attend the actual meal. Your job ends once food is cleared for safety. The Duke eats alone or with close advisors while you return to the kitchen to rest and observe lunch preparations beginning. The mid-morning hours, between breakfast and lunch, offer your freest time. Most servants stay constantly busy with assigned tasks, but tasters need to remain healthy and alert, which means adequate rest. You use these hours in various ways. Sometimes you simply sleep, catching up on rest if the previous night was difficult. Other times you walk the palace grounds, getting fresh air and exercise away from kitchen heat. You've discovered the palace library during these free hours. A small room on the second floor holds books and manuscripts, religious texts mostly, but also histories and administrative records. You can't read, but you enjoy the quiet space and occasionally an educated servant or minor official will read passages aloud if they're in a good mood. These moments connect you to a world beyond kitchens and tasting, reminding you that knowledge and culture exist beyond your narrow focus on survival. Lunch preparations begin around 9:30 for a noon meal. This follows the same pattern as breakfast, but typically involves more elaborate food. The Duke's midday meal might include multiple courses if he's entertaining guests or holding meetings over food. More dishes mean more items to check, more time spent tasting and waiting. On busy days, lunch inspection can take over an hour. After approving lunch and reporting to the steward, you face another waiting period until evening meal preparations begin around 3 o'clock. These afternoon hours in summer are the hardest. The palace grows hot. Everyone feels sluggish, and maintaining vigilance requires effort. You've learned to find cool spots in the palace, certain courtyards with fountains and shade. A storage room in the north wing that stays remarkably cool even in heat. You spend afternoon time talking with other servants when possible. The stable master tells stories about horses and the Duke's riding habits. The dog keeper explains hunting techniques. The wine steward describes different regions and vintages. These conversations serve practical purposes beyond entertainment understanding. Palace operations helps you spot when something seems off or unusual. Evening meal preparations are the most demanding part of your day. Dinner is the Duke's primary meal, especially when he entertains guests. Multiple courses require checking numerous dishes. Elaborate presentations mean more ingredients, more complexity, more opportunities for something to be wrong. You stay in the kitchen throughout evening preparations, watching constantly, asking questions, tasting systematically. The actual tasting process has become second nature through repetition. Small sips of wine from different parts of the serving vessel. Tiny portions of each dish, just enough to detect flavor and texture. Waiting periods between tastings to isolate any symptoms. Taking notes mentally about what you've consumed and when. If multiple dishes share ingredients, you space out tastings to avoid confusion about which item might cause problems. Dinner approval usually comes around 6:30 or 7, depending on the Duke's schedule. The meal proceeds upstairs while you finally eat your own dinner in the servants' hall. This communal space fills with palace servants all eating together, a noisy, crowded gathering where the day's gossip gets shared and tensions from various departments sometimes erupt into arguments. Your meals as a servant are surprisingly good. Not the elaborate preparations served to the Duke, but far better than what most working people eat. Fresh bread, meat or fish several times weekly, vegetables, occasional fruit. The palace feeds servants well, recognizing that healthy workers perform better. As food taster, you eat better than most servants since kitchen staff treat you with wary respect and often share particularly nice items. Evenings after dinner offer brief freedom before sleep. Some servants gamble with dice or cards. Others drink in taverns just outside the palace grounds. A few have romantic relationships with other servants or people from the city. You mostly keep to yourself during these hours, still learning to trust people, still feeling like an outsider despite months of residence. You've made a few tentative friendships. Giorgio, one of the stable hands who shares your sleeping quarters, is close to your age and came from a background similar to yours orphaned, desperate, grateful for palace employment. He doesn't ask many questions about your work, sensing you prefer not to discuss it. Sometimes you join him on walks around the palace grounds in the evenings, just enjoying silent companionship. Maria from the kitchen has also been kind. She treats you almost maternally, despite being only in her 30s. After the poisoning incident 2 weeks ago, she brought you extra food and asked how you felt, showing genuine concern. You remain cautious. Anyone in the kitchen could theoretically be involved in poisoning attempts, but her consistent kindness feels authentic. The palace operates on strict social hierarchy that governs all interactions. The Duke and his family occupy the top tier, of course. Below them are noble advisors, visiting dignitaries, high church officials. The next level includes senior household officials, the steward, chamberlain, master of the stables. Below that come skilled professionals, the head cook, doctor, chaplain. Then general servants like you occupy the lower tiers. Though your specific role as taster gives you slightly odd status, important for security reasons, but not prestigious. You're learning to navigate this hierarchy, showing proper deference to those above you, not overstepping boundaries with social superiors, but also not accepting abuse from people only marginally higher in status who try to assert authority. The balance requires constant attention and adjustment based on situations. Pay arrives. Monthly 5 silver coins delivered by the household treasurer who manages servant wages. This amount exceeds what most servants earn, reflecting the danger premium of your position. You've been saving every coin, hiding them in your locked chest. After 6 months, you've accumulated 30 coins, more money than you've ever possessed. This small fortune represents potential future freedom, if you survive long enough to use it. The coins could eventually buy passage to another city, or rent a small room, or fund apprenticeship in a safer trade. You fantasize sometimes about leaving Florence entirely, going somewhere nobody knows about your past, starting completely fresh. But these remain distant dreams. For now, the coins simply accumulate while you focus on surviving each day. Physical demands of the job are real despite seeming light compared to manual labor. The constant vigilance creates mental exhaustion. Anxiety about potential poisoning produces stress that builds over days and weeks. Your stomach sometimes bothers you from tasting so much rich food throughout the day. You've gained weight since starting. Your face has filled out. Your frame is sturdier. This health improvement from regular good food ironically makes the job itself more sustainable. You also face social isolation that comes with the position. Other servants recognize you're watching them as potential threats. Kitchen staff know you could report suspicious behavior. Even friendly relationships carry underlying tension because your job requires suspecting everyone. This isolation weighs on you more than you expected. Humans need connection and trust, yet your survival depends on trusting nobody completely. The psychological toll shows in your sleep patterns. You dream frequently about poisoning attempts, variations on the recent incident with the wine. Sometimes in dreams you catch the poison. Sometimes you don't recognize it in time. Sometimes you watch helplessly as others consume contaminated food you somehow missed checking. You wake frequently during the night, momentarily confused about where you are, taking seconds to remember you're safe in the servants' quarters. Religious services happen throughout the week, and you've started attending occasionally on rest days. Not from deep faith necessarily, but because the chapel offers quiet refuge from palace chaos. The rituals are familiar from childhood village life before everything fell apart. Sitting in the pews, listening to Latin prayers you don't understand. Watching candle flames and incense smoke, these provide moments of peace that your daily routine lacks. You're also aging faster than your years. 6 months ago, you were a street orphan barely surviving day to day. Now you're a palace servant with responsibilities, income, position, however modest and dangerous. The change shows in how you carry yourself, speak, interact with others. You've learned court manners through observation and occasional correction. Your vocabulary has expanded from listening to educated people. You walk differently, stand straighter, project more confidence despite internal fears. As you prepare for sleep after another day of tastings, you reflect on this strange life you're living. It's simultaneously better and worse than street life. Better because you're fed, housed, compensated. Worse because the threat of poisoning creates constant anxiety that life on the streets never quite matched, despite its own desperate dangers. The bells ring for evening prayers. The servants' quarters grow quiet as exhausted workers settle into their thin mattresses. Tomorrow brings the same routine wake before dawn. Check breakfast, wait, check lunch, wait, check dinner, eat, sleep, repeat. This is life now. This is what it means to be a food taster at a Renaissance court. The cycle continues. And you continue with it, one day at a time. To understand why your job exists, you need to understand the politics that create the danger. Florence in the early 1500s is a complex web of competing interests, shifting alliances, and careful power balancing. The Duke rules not through absolute authority, but through managing relationships with families, institutions, and foreign powers who all want influence in this wealthy city. The Medici family has dominated Florence for generations through banking, trade connections, and strategic marriages. They're not traditional nobility. Their wealth comes from commerce rather than ancient bloodlines. This origins in banking makes them vulnerable to attacks from older, aristocratic families who consider merchants unworthy of ruling. The duke you serve is a Medici, which automatically creates a long list of people who might wish him removed. Several rival families pose potential threats. The Strozzi family, once equal to the Medici in wealth and influence, was pushed out of Florence decades ago after political conflicts. Some family members still live in exile, maintaining networks and waiting for opportunities to return. An assassination that throws Florence into chaos could provide exactly such an opportunity. The Pazzi family has particularly bitter history with the Medici. In 1478, the Pazzi conspired with Pope Sixtus IV to assassinate Lorenzo di Medici and his brother during Easter Mass in the Florence Cathedral. The plot partially succeeded. Lorenzo's brother died, but Lorenzo survived and crushed the Pazzi family in retaliation. That was before your time, but everyone in Florence knows the story. The surviving Pazzi family members harbor deep grudges, though they currently lack power to act openly. Smaller noble families constantly maneuver for advantage within Florence's government and economy. The Guicciardini, Caponi, Salviati, and others hold various official positions and commercial interests. They don't necessarily want to overthrow the Duke, but they wouldn't mind seeing him weakened or replaced with someone more favorable to their specific interests. An assassination creates opportunities for ambitious people to seize more power during the chaos that follows. Beyond Florence's internal politics, foreign powers have strong interests in controlling or influencing the city. Venice, the great maritime republic to the north, competes with Florence for trade dominance in the Mediterranean. Venetian merchants and diplomats maintain constant presence in Florence, watching for weaknesses and chances to expand Venetian influence at Florence's expense. Milan, the powerful duchy to the northwest, pursues similar goals. Milan has attempted military conquest of Florence in the past and continues, seeking ways to bring Florence into its sphere of influence. Assassination of the Florentine Duke, followed by support for a more Milan-friendly replacement, would serve these strategic goals perfectly. The Papal States to the south represent another major player. The Pope in Rome has both religious and political authority across Italy. Different popes have maintained different relationships with Florence, some friendly, others hostile. Currently, relations are reasonably good, but that could change with new papal elections. Church officials in Florence include some who genuinely serve religious functions and others who serve primarily as papal political agents. France casts a long shadow over all Italian politics. French kings have claimed various rights in Italy and periodically invade to enforce these claims. Florence must carefully manage relations with France to avoid becoming a target, while also not alienating other powers who fear French expansion. French diplomats and spies operate throughout Florence, gathering information and cultivating contacts who might prove useful if French interests require intervention. Spain, newly unified and growing in power, also watches Italian affairs closely. Spanish influence comes partly through connections with the Papal States and partly through direct Spanish interests in Mediterranean trade. Like France, Spain maintains networks of informants and friendly contacts within Florence who could be activated if circumstances require. All these competing interests, internal rivals, foreign powers, religious institutions, commercial competitors, create an environment where assassination remains a viable political tool. Removing the Duke might serve any number of different agendas. Your presence as food taster exists because this threat is real and constant. The Duke manages these dangers through multiple strategies. He maintains careful diplomatic relations with all major powers, giving each enough of what they want to avoid making deadly enemies while not conceding so much that Florence loses independence. He balances different internal factions against each other, so no single family or group becomes powerful enough to challenge him directly. He employs extensive networks of informants who watch for plots and conspiracies. Security measures extend beyond your food tasting. The Duke's personal guards are loyal soldiers who have been with him for years. They screen visitors, control access to private areas, investigate suspicious activities. The steward who manages the household maintains lists of approved suppliers and regularly reviews who has access to sensitive areas like the Duke's chambers and private dining rooms. But all these precautions have gaps. Guards can be bribed or threatened. Suppliers might be coerced or replaced with imposters. Loyal servants might have family members held hostage to force cooperation. The complexity of running a renaissance palace creates countless opportunities for someone determined and resourceful, enough to exploit them. Your recent poisoning incident demonstrates exactly this vulnerability. Someone succeeded in contaminating wine that made it all the way to the Duke's table despite multiple security layers. The ongoing investigation hasn't conclusively identified who was responsible or which political interest might have been behind the attempt. Multiple suspects remain under observation. The Venetian ambassador, who was present at that banquet, becomes one focus of suspicion. Venice would benefit from destabilizing Florence, and the ambassador's presence provided convenient cover if the attempt succeeded. Suspicion might fall on the ambassador himself, allowing the real conspirators to escape notice. But this could equally be elaborate misdirection, with the ambassador being deliberately used to throw investigators off the actual trail. A kitchen servant named Paolo, who handled wine preparation that evening, has also faced intense questioning. He comes from a family with historical Pazzi connections, though distant ones. Under interrogation, he insists he did nothing wrong and saw nothing suspicious. But family loyalty runs deep in Florence, and ancient grievances sometimes motivate actions years later. The wine supplier who provided that particular barrel now sits in the palace, dungeons awaiting further investigation. He maintains his innocence, claiming the wine was safe when it left his warehouse. but financial records show he recently received a large sum from an unidentified source. Exactly the pattern you'd expect if someone paid him to tamper with wine or look away, while others did. The steward has quietly reviewed all palace personnel with access to food preparation or storage. Several servants have been reassigned to positions with no such access, not because of proven guilt, but simply because their backgrounds or connections raise concerns. In this environment, even innocent people suffer from association with suspicious families or circumstances. You've learned to observe political undercurrents without directly participating. During your free time wandering palace grounds, you notice who meets with whom in supposedly private corners. In the servants' hall, you listen to gossip about which nobles are currently in favor versus which have fallen from grace. This information helps you understand which political factions might currently have motivation to attempt something dramatic. The Duke himself shows the strain of constant political maneuvering. You don't interact with him directly, but you see him occasionally passing through palace corridors or departing for official functions. He looks older than his actual age, face lined with worry, movements careful and calculated. This is what power costs: constant vigilance, inability to truly trust anyone, awareness that dozens of people might benefit from your death. You understand now why the position of food taster pays well despite recruiting from desperate people with no alternatives. The job isn't just about detecting poison in food. It's about standing at the intersection of all these political forces, absorbing the first blow meant for someone else, serving as a human shield in conflicts you barely comprehend and certainly didn't create. The investigation into the wine poisoning continues. More interrogations, more reviews of security procedures, more tension throughout the palace as everyone wonders who might be secretly working for which faction. You answer questions when asked, but mainly try to stay invisible, doing your job without drawing attention that might make you a target for whoever planned the original attempt. Politics will continue regardless of your survival. The forces that created the need for food tasters existed long before you took this position and will continue long after you're gone, one way or another. You're a minor piece in games played by powerful people pursuing objectives you can only dimly perceive. All you can do is remain alert. Trust your training, keep that antidote vial close, and hope that understanding the political landscape helps you anticipate where the next danger might appear. The game continues. The players pursue their interests, and you stand between them and their target, hoping your vigilance is enough to survive another day. The morning after the poisoning incident, the palace transforms into something between a fortress and an interrogation center. Guards patrol more heavily. Access to certain areas becomes restricted. The atmosphere changes from normal court bustle to tense watchfulness as everyone realizes someone among them attempted to harm the Duke. The investigation begins immediately, under direction of the Duke's chief of security, a stern man named Captain Rosselli, who has served the Medici family for 20 years. He's a professional soldier who treats this like a military operation, systematic, thorough, showing no favoritism regardless of rank or position. Everyone with any connection to the banquet that night falls under scrutiny. You're questioned first, since you experienced the poisoning directly. Captain Rosselli and the steward interview you in a private chamber, asking detailed questions about every moment of that evening. What time did you arrive in the kitchen? Who was present? What did you observe during food preparation? When exactly did the cupbearer bring the wine? Did you notice anything unusual about his behavior, his expression, his movements? You answer as accurately as possible, describing everything you remember. The cupbearer did seem nervous, though you didn't think much of it at the time. Many servants get nervous around important occasions. His hands shook slightly when he presented the goblet. He avoided direct eye contact, which now seemed suspicious, but might have been simple deference. You wish you'd paid closer attention, but you can't invent details that weren't there. The captain asks about the wine itself. What did it look like, smell like, taste like before the bitterness appeared? You described the initial smoothness, the normal Chianti flavor, then the sudden shift to harsh bitterness that struck your throat. The physician who treated you joins the questioning, asking specific questions about symptoms, when they appeared, how quickly they intensified, how long they lasted. Your answers help him narrow down what substance might have been used. After your interrogation, Captain Rosselli moves methodically through everyone else involved. The cupbearer faces the longest, most intense questioning. You don't witness it directly, but other servants whisper that he was questioned for hours, repeatedly going over every detail of how he obtained the wine, who gave it to him, whether anyone approached him before the banquet. He maintains his innocence, claiming he simply retrieved wine from the barrel, as instructed, and delivered it as normal. Kitchen staff face similar scrutiny. Who prepared the wine storage area that day? Who had keys to the wine cellars? Were any strangers observed near the storage areas? Did anyone behave oddly in the days leading up to the banquet? Head cook Salvatore answers questions about his entire staff, their backgrounds, any connections they might have to rival families or foreign interests. The steward reviews supply records meticulously. Which merchant provided that particular wine? When did it arrive? Who inspected it on delivery? Were the seals intact? The wine merchant himself is brought to the palace for questioning, arriving visibly frightened and protesting his innocence before anyone even accuses him of anything. His records show the wine came from a reputable vineyard that has supplied the palace for years without incident. Guards search the wine cellars thoroughly, examining every barrel, checking seals, looking for any signs of tampering. They find nothing obviously suspicious, though the captain notes that someone skilled could have removed and replaced seals without leaving clear evidence. The barrel that supplied the poisoned wine is sealed and removed for further examination. Meanwhile, investigators look into the backgrounds of anyone who might have had opportunity to contaminate the wine. The stable boy who delivered barrels from the wine cellar to the kitchen comes under suspicion simply because he touched them. The servant who cleaned the wine storage area earlier that day faces questions. Even the cooper who maintains the barrels becomes a subject of inquiry. You watch this process unfold while trying to continue your normal duties. The Duke still needs to eat, which means you still need to taste his food. But now every tasting carries even more tension. Security protocols have intensified, more people checking each step, more seals and verifications, more witnesses observing the entire process. Nothing reaches the Duke's table without multiple confirmations of safety. The political implications become apparent as the investigation proceeds. If the culprit has ties to a particular rival family or foreign power, it creates diplomatic complications. Captain Rosselli must balance the need to find truth against the need to avoid creating international incidents based on incomplete evidence. Accusations against foreign diplomats require absolute proof, not mere suspicion. The Venetian ambassador who attended the banquet requests a private meeting with the Duke to formally deny any Venetian involvement. The Duke receives him coolly but correctly, acknowledging the denial while making clear that the investigation will follow evidence wherever it leads. This delicate dance typifies Renaissance, diplomacy maintaining surface courtesy while everyone understands the underlying tensions. 3 days into the investigation, focus narrows to specific suspects. The cupbearer remains in custody, though no confession has been extracted and no clear evidence proves his guilt beyond having handled the contaminated wine. Paolo, the kitchen servant with distant Pazzi family connections, also remains under observation. The wine merchant is released, but told to remain available for further questioning. Captain Rosselli shares his working theory with Senior palace officials in a meeting you overhear while passing outside the chamber. He believes the poison was likely added to the wine after it left storage, but before it reached your table. A narrow window of time involving relatively few people. This suggests inside involvement by someone with legitimate access and knowledge of procedures. Rather than an outside infiltrator. The investigation takes an unexpected turn when a stable servant comes forward with information. He claims to have seen Paolo talking privately with an unknown man outside the palace walls 2 days before the banquet. The conversation seemed furtive, ending quickly when the stable servant approached. The mysterious man left hurriedly, without explanation. Paolo had claimed he was simply asking directions, but the stable servant's instincts told him something felt wrong. This revelation leads to more intense questioning of Paolo. Under pressure, he admits the conversation happened, but maintains it was innocent. The man was a distant relative passing through Florence who wanted news of the family. Yes, that relative had Pazzi connections, but that doesn't mean anything sinister. Merely being born into a certain family doesn't make you a conspirator. Captain Rosselli isn't satisfied. He orders Paolo confined to quarters while investigators try to identify and locate the mysterious visitor. Descriptions are circulated among guards and informants throughout Florence. Several people claim to recognize the description, but the identifications contradict each other. The trail seems to dissolve into confusion and dead ends. Meanwhile, the physical evidence from the poisoned wine is examined by Dr. Benetti and a visiting alchemist from Bologna, who specializes in identifying toxic substances. They test the remaining wine from the barrel, compare it to samples from other barrels from the same shipment, and analyze the residue from the goblet you drank from. Their conclusion comes after a week of testing. The poison was likely a plant-based substance, possibly belladonna or a similar compound, added in relatively small quantity. A larger dose would have been certainly fatal, rather than merely dangerous. This information proved significant. The modest dose suggests either an amateur attempt or a deliberate warning, rather than a serious assassination effort. A skilled poisoner with genuine intent to succeed would have used more, ensuring death rather than just illness. This raises new questions. Was this actually meant to kill the Duke? Or was it intended to frighten him, demonstrate vulnerability, or send some other message? The investigation reaches a frustrating impasse after 2 weeks. Strong suspicions exist, but solid proof remains elusive. The cupbearer is eventually released from detention due to lack of evidence, though he's reassigned to work in the stables rather than returning to serving duties. Paolo also returns to work, but in a position with no access to food preparation. The wine merchant's business suffers from the association, though he was never formally charged with anything. Captain Rosselli confides to the steward, within your hearing, that he believes the true conspirators remain unidentified. The people questioned were likely unwitting tools or innocent victims of circumstance. Whoever actually planned the attempt was clever enough to keep distance from the actual execution, using intermediaries who couldn't reveal much, even under intensive questioning. Security procedures remain in place indefinitely. All wine barrels now get tested more extensively on arrival. Multiple people must witness and verify every step of food preparation. The cupbearer position is eliminated entirely. Wine now gets delivered directly by trusted senior servants who have been with the palace for years. Tasting protocols become even more elaborate, with longer waiting periods and more careful documentation. For you, the investigation reinforces how vulnerable everyone is and how difficult it is to prevent determined attempts. Even intensive searching produced limited results. The attackers, whoever they were, achieved partial success. They created fear and uncertainty while escaping clear identification. The Duke knows his security can be breached. That knowledge creates lasting anxiety that affects every meal, every drink, every moment of daily life. You also understand better that your survival was somewhat fortunate. A slightly larger dose would have overwhelmed the antidote. Slightly longer delay in receiving treatment could have made the difference. You're alive partly through training and protection, but also through simple luck that the dose wasn't quite large, enough to be unstoppable. The investigation officially remains open, but active searching winds down as leads dry up. Life returns to its new normal heightened security, persistent tension, but gradually fading intensity of immediate crisis. Everyone accepts that the mystery might never be fully solved. This is the reality of court intrigue. Not every plot gets exposed. Not every conspirator faces justice. Sometimes danger simply passes, leaving questions rather than answers. You continue your work, more cautious than before, trusting people even less than previously. The investigation taught you that threats can come from unexpected directions, and that even intensive searching might not reveal culprits. Your vigilance is your primary defense, along with the antidote vial that never leaves your person. The game continues with new rules and greater awareness, and you remain alive to play another round. Asterisk. To truly understand your role as food taster, you need to understand what Renaissance banquets represent beyond simple meals. These elaborate gatherings serve as theater, diplomacy, displays of wealth, and political statements all simultaneously. Every detail carries meaning, and your presence ensures the performance can proceed safely. The Duke hosts formal banquets several times monthly, each carefully planned weeks in advance. Guest lists get reviewed by the steward and diplomatic advisors. Seating arrangements reflect current political hierarchies and relationships. Menu selections demonstrate seasonal abundance and access to rare ingredients. Entertainment is coordinated to impress without offending. Everything serves multiple purposes beyond mere hospitality. A typical formal banquet begins in late afternoon and extends through the evening, sometimes lasting 4 or 5 hours. Guests arrive in elaborate clothing, silk gowns, velvet doublets, jewelry that represents family wealth and status. The Duke receives them in a formal reception hall where initial greetings establish the evening's tone. Wine and light refreshments are offered during this preliminary gathering while everyone assembles. The actual meal takes place in the Great Hall, a magnificent space with high ceilings, large windows, and walls decorated with tapestries depicting classical scenes and family history. Long tables are arranged in specific configurations depending on the number and status of guests. The Duke's table sits elevated on a platform, establishing visual hierarchy. Other guests are positioned according to their importance and the political messages the Duke wants to send about current relationships. Table settings themselves display wealth and refinement. Silver plates and goblets for important guests, fine ceramic ware for others. Linen tablecloths embroidered with the Medici coat of arms. Multiple utensils for different courses, knives, spoons, and the recently fashionable forks that are slowly gaining acceptance among Italian nobility. Fresh flowers arranged as centerpieces. Candles in elaborate holders providing warm light as evening progresses. The meal proceeds through numerous courses, each presented with ceremony. First course typically features light items, fruits, nuts, aged cheeses, delicate pastries. This allows guests to settle in, begin conversations, and prepare for heavier food to come. Wine flows freely from the start, though servants carefully monitor consumption to prevent guests from becoming excessively intoxicated too early. Second course brings soups and lighter protein dishes. Fish preparations feature prominently, especially during religious fasting periods when meat is prohibited. The kitchen's skill shows in transforming simple ingredients into elaborate presentations, fish shaped to resemble other animals, soups colored with saffron and decorated with edible flowers, bread carved into architectural forms. Main courses follow roasted meats that took hours of preparation, whole pigs turning on spits since morning, Elaborate poultry dishes featuring peacocks or swans, sometimes reassembled after cooking with feathers restored to create spectacular visual presentations. Gained from hunting expeditions: venison, wild boar, rabbits prepared with complex sauces using expensive spices, vegetables roasted, stewed, or transformed into purees that accompany the proteins dot between courses. Entertainers perform to give guests time to digest and kitchen staff time to prepare the next presentation. Musicians play lutes, harps, and early keyboard instruments. Singers perform both religious and secular songs. Sometimes poets recite verses composed specifically for the occasion, praising the host and honored guests. Occasionally actors present brief, comic scenes or classical tableaux. Your role during these banquets is both visible and invisible. You taste everything before it reaches the Duke's table, working in a side chamber adjacent to the Great Hall. Servants bring you samples of each dish. You perform your checks, and only after your approval does food proceed to the main event. You can hear the entertainment and conversation through walls, but you're excluded from the actual gathering. You're working while others celebrate. The timing requires careful coordination. Courses must flow at appropriate intervals, not so fast that guests feel rushed, not so slow that conversation lags and energy drops. The kitchen sends signals when dishes are ready. The steward manages pacing, reading the room's mood and adjusting speed accordingly. Your tastings must happen quickly enough not to delay service, but carefully enough not to miss dangers. Sweet courses arrive. Toward the end, elaborate sugar sculptures, fruit preserves, marzipan shaped into fantastical forms, honey cakes, and the relatively new luxury of chocolate from Spanish colonies. These sweets represent enormous expense and sophisticated technique. A single sugar sculpture might cost as much as a servant earns in months. They serve as edible art that guests admire before carefully dismantling to taste. Wine service continues throughout, with different varieties paired to different courses. Light whites with fish, robust reds with meat, sweet wines with desserts. The wine steward manages this progression, selecting from the extensive cellars and presenting each new variety with explanation of its origins and characteristics. This educational element adds intellectual dimension to the sensory experience. The final course traditionally features digestive aids aged cheeses, nuts, candied fruits intended to settle stomachs after heavy eating. This signals the transition from formal dining to more relaxed socializing. Guests may leave the tables to circulate, form smaller conversation groups, or move to other palace rooms for continued entertainment or private discussions. The political dimensions of these banquets are as important as the food itself. Seating arrangements send messages about who holds favor and who has fallen from grace. A merchant seated close to the Duke's table gains status that helps his business negotiations. A nobleman placed farther away understands his current standing has diminished. Foreign ambassadors read these signals carefully, reporting back to their home courts about shifting Florentine alliances. Menu choices also carry political meaning. Serving exotic ingredients from Venetian trade routes acknowledges Venice's commercial importance. Featuring game from recent hunting trips displays the Duke's leisure activities and connection to the land. Presenting elaborate sugarworks demonstrates wealth and access to goods from Spanish-controlled territories, implicitly referencing relationships with Spanish power. Even entertainment selections reflect political calculation. Classical Latin poetry appeals to educated humanists and church officials. Secular love songs entertain younger nobles. Comic performances provide levity without offense. The balance aims to satisfy diverse guests while avoiding anything that might cause discomfort or controversy. You've learned to read these events from your position of serving rather than attending. The enthusiasm of applause tells you which entertainments landed well. The level of conversation noise indicates whether guests are engaged or bored. The pace at which food disappears shows whether the kitchen's efforts are appreciated. These indicators help you understand the evening's success, even though you're not in the room. The cost of these banquets is staggering. A single elaborate dinner might consume resources equivalent to what a working family lives on for a year. Hundreds of pounds of meat, dozens of exotic ingredients, wine by the barrel, payments to entertainers, compensation to additional servants hired for the occasion. It all adds up to extraordinary expense. Yet the Duke considers it worthwhile because these displays maintain his status. And political relationships dot the morning after a major banquet. The palace buzzes with servant gossip about what happened. Who drank too much and embarrassed themselves? Which noble flirted with which lady? Did anyone insult anyone else? Were there private conversations in corners that suggested new alliances forming? This information flows through servant networks, providing insights into court dynamics that often prove as valuable as official communications. You notice how different guests treat servants during these events. Some nobles are courteous, thanking servers, asking politely for items. Others treat servants as invisible or barely human, snapping fingers impatiently, complaining about minor imperfections. These differences reveal character in ways formal diplomacy might hide. A foreign ambassador who treats servants respectfully often proves more trustworthy in negotiations than one who shows contempt. The physical demands on kitchen staff during major banquets are intense. Salvatore drives his team mercilessly to meet timing and quality requirements. Fires must stay at exact temperatures for hours. Multiple complex dishes proceed simultaneously. Presentation requirements demand artistic skill in addition to cooking expertise. Mistakes are not acceptable when the Duke's reputation depends on flawless execution. For you, banquets represent the highest stress moments of your job. More dishes mean more tastings. Important guests mean higher stakes if something goes wrong. The elaborate nature of preparations creates more opportunities for contamination, whether accidental or deliberate. You remain intensely focused throughout these events, knowing that any failure could be catastrophic. Yet there's also something magnificent about these occasions that you appreciate despite not participating directly. The combination of culinary art, visual spectacle, musical performance, and political theater represents Renaissance culture at its height. These banquets embody the era's commitment to beauty, sophistication, and the display of human achievement in multiple domains simultaneously. As a banquet concludes and guests finally depart, often well past midnight, the palace slowly returns to normal rhythms. Servants clean the great hall, washing hundreds of dishes, folding linens, storing unused food. The kitchen staff collapses in exhaustion after their marathon of preparation and service. You return to your quarters bone-tired, but relieved another major event passed safely. The cycle will repeat in a few weeks when the next important occasion requires another elaborate banquet. The guests will change, the menu will vary, but the underlying patterns remain constant: food as art and politics, entertainment as diplomacy, and your role ensuring all this magnificent theater doesn't become tragedy. This is the culture you serve, the world you protect, the strange and elaborate reality of Renaissance court life. As you approach the end of your first year as food taster, you find yourself wondering about those who came before you and what eventually happened to them. The profession has a long history, and understanding the various paths tasters have taken helps you imagine possible futures for yourself. Historical records from various European courts provide glimpses into the lives of food tasters across the centuries. Some stories end tragically, others remarkably well, and many simply fade into obscurity with no clear resolution. These varied outcomes reflect the unpredictable nature of the position. Success depends on skill, luck, political circumstances, and factors beyond anyone's control. The most successful tasters were those who survived long enough to become trusted advisors. A taster who served for many years without incident proved their competence and loyalty. Some rulers developed genuine relationships with their long-serving tasters, elevating them to positions of greater responsibility. You've heard of cases where tasters eventually became household stewards, security advisors, or received land grants as rewards for faithful service. One famous example from French court history tells of a taster named Zhang, who served King Charles VII for 15 years in the early 1400s. He survived several actual poisoning attempts, his quick recognition saving the king's life multiple times. Eventually, the grateful king appointed him to an administrative position overseeing royal estates, providing comfortable retirement with substantial income. Zhang lived to old age, respected and financially secure. Another successful case involved a woman named Caterina who served an Italian duchess in the late 1400s. Female tasters were extremely rare, but this particular duchess trusted only women in her personal service after a betrayal by male servants. Caterina served for 12 years before retiring to a convent with a generous pension from the duchess. She spent her final decades in religious contemplation, presumably at peace after years of constant danger. But these success stories represent exceptions rather than typical outcomes. Most tasters served much shorter periods. Records suggest the average tenure was only 2 to 3 years before tasters either died, became too ill to continue, or fled to other work. The constant stress, occasional exposure to harmful substances, and psychological toll of living with perpetual danger took heavy tolls even on those who never experienced serious poisoning incidents. Some tasters simply disappeared from historical records after brief mentions. A name appears in household accounts, receiving wages for several months, and vanishes without explanation. Did they die? Leave the position? Move to another court? The silence in records suggests these individuals weren't important enough for their fates to be documented. They served, they left or died, and history forgot them. The profession began declining in the 1600s as European politics gradually stabilized. The chaos of the Renaissance period, with its constantly shifting alliances and frequent assassination attempts, slowly gave way to more structured international relations. Poison remained a threat, but became less common as other political tools gained effectiveness. Courts started relying more on diplomatic protocols and military power rather than assassination. Medical advances also contributed to the profession's decline. Better understanding of toxicology allowed for improved prevention methods. Sealed containers became more sophisticated and harder to tamper with undetected. Food safety practices improved across society, reducing accidental contamination that sometimes mimicked poisoning. These developments made the specific role of food taster less essential. By the early 1700s, most major European courts had abandoned the practice entirely. A few conservative monarchs maintained tasters out of tradition, but the golden age of the profession had passed. The last documented official food taster in a European court served the Spanish king in the 1740s, and even that position was more ceremonial than functional. The profession's legacy persists in unexpected ways. The heightened attention to food safety that tasters represented eventually influenced broader food handling practices. The systematic checking procedures developed for protecting rulers gradually spread to commercial food preparation. Modern food safety regulations trace some ancestry to methods first developed for protecting medieval and Renaissance nobility. The profession also left marks on language and culture. Expressions like testing the waters derive partly from the practice of testing wine and other liquids for safety. The concept of someone taking risks on behalf of others appears in various cultural contexts influenced by the historical reality of food tasters. Literature and art from the Renaissance period frequently reference tasters, establishing them as recognizable figures in the cultural imagination. Modern historians and archaeologists continue studying the profession. Recent analysis of remains from Renaissance-era graves has revealed evidence of chronic low-level poisoning in some. Individuals whose positions in household records suggests they might have been tasters. These findings provide physical confirmation of the dangers these people faced, even when they survived individual incidents. Contemporary forensic science applied to historical cases has revealed surprising details about specific poisoning attempts. Analysis of wine residue from sealed Renaissance-era containers has identified the exact substances used in several documented assassination attempts. This scientific investigation of historical evidence helps us understand the real dangers tasters confronted, rather than relying solely on dramatic accounts that might exaggerate or minimize. Your own future remains uncertain. You've survived almost a year, which already places you among the more successful tasters. The poisoning incident tested your training and resolve, and you came through alive. This experience provides both confidence and sobering awareness confidence that you can handle the job. Awareness that success one time doesn't guarantee survival the next. You've saved most of your wages, accumulating a small fortune by your previous standards. With another year of service, you'll have enough to potentially leave Florence and start fresh elsewhere. Maybe buy a small farm in the countryside. Maybe apprentice to a trade where your life doesn't depend on drinking potentially poisoned wine. These dreams sustain you through difficult days. But you also feel unexpected attachment to this position. The regular meals, comfortable quarters, and relative respect you receive as a palace servant all represent dramatic improvement over street life. You've learned skills, observation, analysis, understanding complex social dynamics that might prove valuable in other contexts. The palace has become familiar, almost comfortable despite the dangers. You've also developed relationships that matter to you. Giorgio, your roommate from the stables, has become a genuine friend. Maria in the kitchen treats you almost as family. Even crusty old Salvatore has warmed to you slightly, occasionally praising your careful attention to safety procedures. These connections provide something you lacked during years alone on the streets, belonging to a community, however imperfect. The Duke himself remains distant and impersonal, but you take pride in protecting him. He represents more than just one man. He symbolizes Florence's stability and prosperity. The city's thousands of residents depend on maintained order and functioning government. Your role in protecting the ruler contributes to broader social welfare, giving your work meaning beyond simple survival. You think about the other tasters throughout history who faced similar choices and uncertainties. Most are forgotten, their names lost to time. But they lived real lives, felt real fears, experienced real hopes and disappointments. You're part of that long tradition, connected across centuries to others who stood in similar positions, tasting food and wondering about their futures. The profession may be dying as political conditions change and safety practices improve. Future generations might read about food tasters as curious historical artifacts, unable to fully imagine what it felt like to live this strange existence. But for now, in this moment of Renaissance history, the profession remains real and necessary. And you're living it, experiencing what will eventually become history that others study. As you prepare for another day of tastings, you acknowledge the multiple possible futures ahead. You might survive to retirement with saved wages and perhaps a reward from a grateful duke. You might die in service, becoming another forgotten name in household records. You might flee to other work before either outcome. The uncertainty itself is perhaps the most defining characteristic of the profession. But today you're still here, still checking food, still protecting the Duke, still part of this extraordinary moment when Renaissance Florence flowers with art and culture and political intrigue. Whatever your eventual fate, you'll have lived through something remarkable, witnessed history from an unusual vantage point, and played a small role in events larger than yourself. The legacy of food tasters is ultimately about ordinary people caught up in extraordinary circumstances, doing dangerous work because circumstances left them few alternatives. That legacy continues through you, one careful sip at a time, one day survived leading to the next. Your position as food taster places you in a strange liminal space within the palace hierarchy. You are neither fully servant nor trusted confidant, neither invisible kitchen staff nor honored courtier. You exist in between, noticed only when performing your deadly duty, ignored the rest of the time. Understanding where you fit in the complex social world of a Renaissance court is essential for survival beyond simply avoiding poison. The palace operates on strict hierarchical principles that everyone understands instinctively. At the top sits the Duke and his immediate family. Below them are the high nobility, foreign ambassadors, and wealthy merchants with political influence. Then come the lesser nobles, artists, and scholars under ducal patronage and military officers. The administrative layer includes the steward, the captain of guards, and the Duke's private secretary. You fall somewhere in the middle range of palace servants. Above you are the steward, who manages the entire household, the Duke's personal valet, who handles his clothing in private chambers, and the wine steward who manages the extensive cellars. The head cook commands the kitchen with absolute authority. The captain of guards controls security. These senior servants wield real power and influence. Below you are the ordinary servants who perform manual labor, kitchen assistants who haul water and scrub pots, stable boys who muck out horse stalls, laundry workers who wash linens in massive tubs, gardeners who maintain the grounds. These workers are numerous, largely interchangeable, and receive minimal pay. They sleep in crowded dormitories and eat the cheapest food. Your position as food taster earns more respect than ordinary servants, but less than senior staff. You receive private sleeping quarters, a significant privilege. Your wages are substantially higher than kitchen workers receive. You eat better food, wear cleaner clothes, and have access to areas of the palace forbidden to common servants. But this elevated status creates complications. Other servants view you with mixed feelings. Some show genuine sympathy, understanding the danger you face daily. The kitchen staff who prepare food you must test often express quiet concern for your well-being. Maria, one of the cooks, sometimes slips you extra portions of food she personally prepared and knows to be safe. Others resent your higher pay and better quarters despite performing what they see as minimal actual work. You taste food for perhaps an hour total each day, while they labor from dawn until late evening. The fact that your brief work carries deadly risk does not always register with those who measure labor by hours spent rather than danger faced. Giorgio, your stable-hand friend, occupies similar uncertain social territory. As someone who personally tends the Duke's favorite horses, he receives better treatment than ordinary stable workers, but still performs physical labor that marks him as lower status. You bond over this shared experience of being neither fish nor fowl in the palace hierarchy. The senior servants largely ignore you unless your work directly intersects with theirs. The steward interacts with you only to adjust schedules or investigate security concerns. The wine steward views you as a useful tool for verifying his products are safe. The captain of guards questions you when investigating potential threats. These interactions are professional and impersonal. The nobles and courtiers treat you as essentially invisible most of the time. You stand beside the Duke's table during banquets, but their conversations flow around you as if you are a piece of furniture. They discuss politics, gossip about scandals, negotiate business deals, all while you taste their food mere feet away. Your presence is acknowledged only in the moment when you lift a goblet or sample a dish. This invisibility provides unexpected advantages. People say things in front of you they would never express before someone they considered socially significant. You learn which nobles are plotting against each other, which merchants are bribing officials, which foreign ambassadors are lying about their government's intentions. This information could be valuable if you knew how to use it safely. But the invisibility also isolates you. You cannot form genuine friendships with nobles who barely acknowledge your existence. The other servants keep distance due to jealousy or the superstitious belief that associating with someone who regularly encounters poison might bring bad luck. Even romantic possibilities are limited by your strange status. The Servant Gossip Network provides your primary social connection beyond Giorgio and Maria. In the servants' hall where you take some meals, information flows constantly. Who is having an affair with whom? Which noble has fallen from the Duke's favor? What foreign delegation is arriving next week? Which kitchen worker was caught stealing and severely punished? You learn to navigate these conversations carefully. Sharing what you know from standing invisible beside the Duke's table can increase your status in the servant community. But revealing too much might mark you as untrustworthy or dangerous to be around. The balance is delicate. Your position also affects how you are perceived by people outside the palace. When you venture into Florence on your occasional free days, other citizens treat you with a mixture of respect and unease. Working in the ducal palace carries prestige, but your specific role as poison taster makes people uncomfortable. You are associated with death and danger, not qualities that attract friendly conversation. Potential romantic partners are particularly wary. A young woman you met at a market seemed interested until she learned your profession. Her face changed immediately, and she made excuses to leave. The awareness that you might die at any meal makes you a poor prospect for anyone seeking stability. Who wants to risk becoming a widow or widower without warning? The religious community shows more acceptance. Priests and monks understand that all life involves risk and that your work serves a legitimate purpose protecting the Duke. When you attend church services, the priest greets you respectfully. Some monks have even sought you out to discuss theological questions about fate and divine protection. Children react to you with fascinated horror. They have heard stories about poison tasters from their parents and view you as a character from a dramatic tale rather than a real person. Some ask breathless questions about whether you have ever been poisoned. Others stare wide-eyed before running away. The psychological impact of your social isolation weighs on you over time. Humans are social creatures who need connection and community. Your position provides neither fully. You are not part of the noble world you serve, nor fully integrated into the servant community, nor able to maintain normal relationships with people outside the palace. You compensate by forming intense bonds with the few people who do accept you. Giorgio becomes like a brother, someone you trust absolutely and share your fears with during late-night conversations. Maria fills a maternal role, providing comfort and care in small gestures. The physician who treated you after the poisoning incident sometimes engages you in intellectual discussion, valuing your observations about symptoms and reactions. These few genuine relationships sustain you emotionally. They provide the human connection necessary to maintain sanity in an otherwise isolating existence. Without them, the loneliness of your position might become unbearable. You also develop relationships with objects and routines that provide stability. The antidote vial becomes almost a talisman, something you check multiple times daily for reassurance. Your small room becomes a sanctuary where you can close the door and exist as yourself rather than as the poison taster. The morning walk through the palace gardens before your duties begin provides peaceful solitude. The complex social dynamics extend to power relationships you must navigate carefully. The steward can make your life easier or harder through small decisions about scheduling and resources. Remaining on his good side requires deference and competence. The head cook controls what food reaches you for testing, and could theoretically make your job more dangerous if he chose. You learn the subtle arts of palace politics. Small gestures of respect to senior servants. Careful neutrality in disputes between different factions. Never appearing to take sides in the constant jockeying for position and favor. These skills are as important for survival as your ability to detect poison. The seasonal rhythm of court life affects your social world. During major holidays and festivals, the palace fills with additional people and the social atmosphere becomes more chaotic and energetic. These periods offer more opportunity for interaction, but also more danger as security becomes harder to maintain with crowds of visitors. The summer months when the Duke travels to country estates create different social dynamics. The reduced staff who accompany him become closer due to the smaller group size. Those left behind at the main palace enjoy more relaxed conditions without the Duke's direct oversight. Your social position also involves managing information asymmetry. You know things about the Duke's meals, his health concerns, his security fears that other servants do not. This knowledge could be traded for social advantage, but doing so would betray the trust implicit in your position and likely result in severe punishment. As you approach the end of your first year in this role, you have learned to navigate the complex social landscape. You understand your place in the hierarchy and how to interact appropriately with those above and below you. You have identified the few genuine friends worth cultivating and learned to tolerate the isolation that comes with your unique position. The social aspects of being a food taster are less dramatic than the physical danger, but equally important for long-term survival. A person completely isolated and without human connection might make fatal mistakes born of loneliness and desperation. Your few but genuine relationships, your understanding of palace politics, and your acceptance of your ambiguous status help you maintain the psychological stability necessary to continue this strange and dangerous work. You are learning that survival is not just about detecting poison in wine. It is also about finding your place in a complex social world, building the human connections that make life bearable, and navigating the invisible hierarchies that govern every interaction. These lessons may prove as valuable as any knowledge about antidotes and symptoms. Your survival as a food taster depends not just on your own vigilance, but on the knowledge and skills of the court's medical practitioners. The physician who treated you after the poisoning incident represents one pillar of this support system. The alchemist who prepares antidotes and studies toxic substances represents another. Understanding how Renaissance medicine approaches poison gives you better chances of surviving the next attempt on the Duke's life. A court physician, Dr. Benetti, occupies a respected position in the palace hierarchy. He studied at the University of Padua, one of Europe's leading medical schools, and brings both classical learning and practical experience to his work. Unlike common healers, who rely primarily on folk remedies and superstition, he can read Latin medical texts and understands anatomical principles that most people never encounter. His position grants him access to both nobles and servants, a rare privilege in the strictly stratified palace world. The Duke consults him about health concerns and values his advice on matters of safety and security. Yet he also treats kitchen workers who burn themselves and stable hands who break bones. This broad exposure gives him perspective on how poison might enter the palace through various channels. Dr. Benetti's understanding of poison is grounded in classical medical theory that dominated Renaissance thinking. He explains to you during one of your consultations that the body contains 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, which must remain in balance for health to continue. Each humor has qualities of hot or cold, wet or dry. Disease results when these humors fall out of proper proportion. Poison, in this theoretical framework, represents a substance that violently disrupts humoral balance. Different poisons affect different humors in different ways. Some create excessive heat, causing fever and inflammation. Others produce cold, leading to weakness and numbness. Understanding which humor a poison targets helps determine appropriate treatment, though this theory's practical utility is limited by the fact that it doesn't always correspond to observable reality. The doctor teaches you to recognize symptoms that might indicate specific categories of poison. Substances that attack the blood typically cause redness, heat, and rapid pulse. Those affecting phlegm produce cold sweats and sluggish reactions. Bile-related poisons trigger vomiting and digestive distress. This categorization system provides a framework for thinking about poison's effects even if the underlying theory is scientifically questionable. More practically useful is his instruction on observing physical signs of poisoning. Changes in skin color can indicate problems. Flushed red, suggesting one type of poison. Pale or gray, suggesting another. Yellowish tint, possibly indicating liver damage from toxic substances. Pupil dilation or contraction provides clues. Excessive salivation or extreme dry mouth signal different dangers. Breathing patterns reveal respiratory distress. The alchemist who works in a laboratory beneath the palace represents a different tradition of knowledge. Maestro Ficino is older than the physician, with long gray hair and hands stained by years of working with chemical substances. Unlike Dr. Benetti's academic medical training, Ficino's knowledge comes from experimentation, observation, and secrets passed down through generations of practitioners. His laboratory is a fascinating and slightly frightening space. Furnaces heat various substances in clay crucibles. Glass retorts and alembics distill liquids into concentrated forms. Shelves hold hundreds of jars containing powders, dried plants, mineral samples, and stranger things preserved in alcohol. The air carries complex smells, sulfur, herbs, heated metals, and unidentifiable chemical odors that make your eyes water. Ficino practices what he calls the art of transformation, taking raw materials and changing them into medicines, poisons, or other useful substances. He understands that many substances can serve as either medicine or poison, depending on dose and preparation. The same plant that relieves pain in small amounts can cause death in larger quantities. This knowledge makes him invaluable for both creating antidotes and understanding how poisons work. He shows you samples of common poisons used in assassination attempts. Arsenic appears as a white powder easily hidden in food or wine. It has almost no taste when properly prepared, making it particularly dangerous. Symptoms include severe stomach pain, vomiting, and eventual organ failure if the dose is sufficient. The death can take hours or days, depending on amount consumed. Belladonna, derived from a plant also called deadly nightshade, affects the nervous system. Even small amounts cause pupil dilation, blurred vision, confusion, and hallucinations. Larger doses lead to convulsions and respiratory failure. Ficino notes that belladonna has legitimate medical uses in very controlled doses, but remains extremely dangerous in untrained hands. Hemlock, the poison that killed Socrates in ancient Athens, grows wild in various parts of Italy. It produces progressive paralysis, starting with the legs and moving upward through the body, while leaving the mind conscious until the end. Death comes from respiratory failure when the paralysis reaches the breathing muscles. It's considered one of the more merciful poisons because consciousness fades before the final moments. Mercury and lead compounds can cause chronic poisoning through repeated small exposures. These metals accumulate in the body over time, eventually causing tremors, mental confusion, organ damage, and death. Because the effects build gradually, victims might not realize they're being poisoned until damage becomes irreversible. This makes metallic poisons useful for conspirators who want deaths to appear natural. The alchemist prepares several types of antidotes and protective substances for you. The most important is the complex mixture you carry in your vial, a theriac containing dozens of ingredients. This traditional antidote formula dates back to ancient times and supposedly counteracts multiple poisons simultaneously. Whether it actually works as advertised is questionable, but it does contain substances that promote vomiting and may help expel poisons before they're fully absorbed. He also gives you packets of activated charcoal to keep in your quarters. If you suspect poisoning, swallowing charcoal mixed with water can absorb some toxic substances in the stomach before they enter the bloodstream. This simple treatment lacks the mystique of elaborate alchemical preparations, but may be more reliably effective. Another preparation he provides is an emetic made from ipecac root. This bitter liquid induces powerful vomiting within minutes. Taking it immediately after suspecting poison can empty your stomach before much absorption occurs. The physician and alchemist both stress that speed matters crucially in poisoning cases. The sooner you can expel or neutralize the substance, the better your chances. Both practitioners emphasize the limitations of their knowledge. Dr. Benetti admits that distinguishing poison from disease is often impossible without clear evidence. Fever, vomiting, and weakness could indicate poisoning, or they could result from spoiled food, natural illness, or various other causes. Without catching someone in the act of poisoning food, or finding clear physical evidence of toxic substances, determining what actually happened remains largely guesswork. Maestro Ficino is equally honest about antidotes. The elaborate theriac you carry might help against some poisons and prove useless against others. Much depends on what specific substance you've encountered, how much you consumed, how quickly you recognize the problem and take action. The antidotes increase your odds, but guarantee nothing. They teach you practical protocols for responding to suspected poisoning. First, stop consuming the suspicious food or drink immediately. Second, take the emetic to induce vomiting if you haven't already vomited naturally. Third, drink the theriac antidote. Fourth, send immediately for the physician, regardless of time of day. Fifth, try to preserve samples of whatever you consumed for later testing. The testing process itself is imprecise. Ficino can analyze suspected poison by observing how it affects small animals, testing its reactions with various reagents, or simply tasting minute amounts himself. None of these methods provide definitive answers, but they can sometimes identify familiar substances. The physician can examine your symptoms and compare them to documented cases of known poisons. You spend several sessions in Ficino's laboratory learning to recognize common toxic plants by sight and smell. He shows you dried samples of belladonna, hemlock, foxglove, and other dangerous species. You learn which parts of each plant are most toxic, how they might be concealed in food, what distinctive characteristics might reveal their presence. The education extends to mineral poisons as well. Arsenic's lack of color or strong smell makes it difficult to detect, but very large doses might leave a garlicky odor. Lead compounds often have slightly sweet taste that might be noticeable in wine. Mercury preparations can leave metallic aftertaste. These subtle clues might provide your only warning. Both the physician and alchemist stress the importance of observation and documentation. They encourage you to keep mental notes of exactly what you taste, what sensations you experience, how quickly any symptoms develop. This information could prove crucial for identifying poison types and developing more effective responses. The psychological dimension of this medical education affects you significantly. Learning about all the ways poison can kill makes you more anxious about your work, not less. Every meal becomes an exercise in hypervigilance as you watch for the subtle signs they've taught you to recognize. Knowledge increases both your competence and your fear. Yet you also find the knowledge oddly empowering. Understanding how poisons work demystifies them somewhat. They're not magical or supernatural threats, but physical substances with observable properties and effects. You're not completely helpless against them. You have tools, protocols, and support from knowledgeable practitioners. The odds are still against you in many ways, but they're not quite as hopeless as they seemed initially. The relationship you develop with Dr. Benetti and Maestro Ficino provides more than just medical support. They're among the few people in the palace who treat you as a person rather than a tool. The physician discusses medical theory with you as if your understanding matters. The alchemist shares knowledge, usually guarded as professional secrets. These gestures of respect help counteract the dehumanization inherent in your position. As you continue your work as food taster, the medical knowledge becomes integrated into your daily practice. You no longer just taste food and hope for the best. You observe, analyze, remember, compare. You carry not just antidotes, but understanding. The combination of your vigilance, the physician's medical expertise, and the alchemist's practical knowledge creates the best defense available against the poison threats that define your existence. Medicine and alchemy in the Renaissance are imperfect sciences built on questionable theories and limited by primitive understanding of chemistry and biology. But they represent humanity's best efforts to combat poison's dangers. As someone whose life depends on those efforts, you're grateful for whatever protection they can provide, however incomplete it might be. Living with the constant possibility of death forces you to confront questions most people can avoid for years. Why are you here? What purpose does your suffering serve? Is there any meaning to be found in standing between poison and power? These questions push you toward religion, superstition, and philosophy in search of answers that might make your existence bearable. The Catholic Church shapes religious life in Renaissance Florence. The great cathedral dome rises above the city, a permanent reminder of both divine presence and human ambition. Church bells mark the rhythm of your days, calling people to prayer at regular intervals. Faith is not a private hobby, but part of the shared structure of everyday life. You attend Mass regularly, partly for spiritual comfort, and partly because skipping services would make you suspicious in a society where public faith is expected. The familiar ritual offers structure. The Latin prayers, even if you understand only fragments, give you a sense of belonging to something larger than yourself. Incense, candlelight, and music briefly lift you out of the narrow world of kitchens, corridors, and tasting cups. Prayer becomes a daily companion at work. Before each meal you must test, you whisper a short plea for protection. Lord, if it be your will, let this cup pass safely. The words feel both sincere and slightly paradoxical. If everything is in God's hands, today's outcome is already decided. Yet speaking the words steadies your hands. You are not talking to the wine. You are talking to someone beyond it. Over time, you build small personal rituals that sit somewhere between faith and superstition. You cross yourself 3 times before tasting wine. You touch the small wooden cross at your neck before taking the first bite. Sometimes you repeat the same line from a psalm while waiting to see whether any symptom appears. You know none of this is a guaranteed shield, but without these gestures it is harder to keep your fear under control. The idea of divine providence gives one way to explain your position. Perhaps God has placed you in this exact role for reasons you cannot yet understand. Your dangerous work might be part of a larger pattern in which the ruler's safety matters for the peace of the whole city. That thought is comforting when it suggests your life has meaning. It becomes unsettling when you ask yourself whether that meaning might include your death. The Duke's confessor, Father Domenico, sometimes speaks with you after services. He does not treat you as furniture from the Great Hall, but as a person living very close to danger. In confession, you admit not only ordinary faults, but also the fear that sits in you like a second heartbeat. He tells you that fear itself is not a sin, that even saints were afraid. What matters is what you do despite that fear. One day he tells you stories of saints who faced the prospect of death with remarkable steadiness. St. Lawrence, who according to tradition faced execution with such courage that he supposedly joked with his executioners even in his final moments. St. Sebastian, who survived one attempt on his life only to face another while remaining faithful. These stories are offered not for their details, but to show that human beings can remain themselves even when their future seems to narrow to a single point. You listen and understand the gap between their path and yours. They faced death for refusing to deny what they believed. If you die, it will not be because you refused to renounce your faith, but because someone chose poison over a dagger. Their deaths were bound to a clear choice. Yours, if it comes, may look more like being in the wrong place when someone else makes a decision. Where official religion leaves spaces, superstition flows in. You are not alone in this. Even educated people in your time blend Christian practice with older signs, personal rituals, and habits the Church does not fully approve but cannot fully erase. These layers of belief create another level of perceived protection, more psychological than spiritual. You carry a small leather pouch filled with herbs blessed by a priest and gathered from a monastery garden. Formally, they are simply blessed plants. For you, the pouch feels like a little shield. You know poison does not vanish because you touch it, but going into the banquet hall without it would feel like stepping into battle barehanded. You also hear the palace astrologer mention days when the sky looks unfavorable, when he believes plots are more likely. His work sits awkwardly at the edge of accepted belief, yet important people listen to him. You do not build your life purely around his warnings, but you notice that on those dangerous days, you look a little longer at the color of the wine and take a slightly slower breath before you drink. Gradually, you develop your own small signs. If you see 3 black birds together on the way to the kitchens, the day feels heavier. If the first person you meet in the corridor greets you kindly, you count that as a good omen. If wine foams in a strange way, your heart beats a little faster. There is no true logic in any of this, but the human mind prefers patterns, even fragile ones, to pure chaos. On sleepless nights, you return to the old argument about fate and free will. If everything is decided in advance, then your caution changes nothing. Whether you live another year or fall at the next supper was written long before you were born. That thought can be strangely calming because it lifts responsibility from your shoulders. It can also feel suffocating. If nothing can be changed, why try so hard to stay alive? If, on the other hand, free choice matters, then your every decision becomes heavy. Every extra sniff of the wine, every recheck of a plate, every moment of attention or distraction could tip the scale. This idea is empowering and exhausting at the same time. You are never completely off duty, even inside your own head. With time you arrive at a middle ground. Perhaps there are broad lines in life you cannot move, but within them there is still room to choose. You cannot erase the fact that you are a taster, but you can choose how you live that role. In panic or with some degree of acceptance, bitter toward everyone or still capable of kindness. Beyond formal faith in private rituals, you start forming your own quiet philosophy. You are not looking for a grand theory of everything. You are looking for something you can carry with you into the banquet hall and out again. Stay alive is too small a purpose. You need a reason to get up and put your feet on the floor, even on the mornings when fear feels heavier than your blanket. One way you find meaning is by seeing yourself as serving more than one person. You may not admire every decision the Duke makes, but his continued rule means that Florence does not fall into chaos. Shops open, bread is baked, children walk to lessons, artisans carve stone and paint altarpieces. Your work is one small stitch in a much larger fabric. Through that lens, taking the first swallow of wine is not just about his life or yours. It is about all the other lives that remain undisturbed if the palace does not explode into crisis. Another source of meaning comes from what this dangerous work teaches you about life. Most people can keep death tucked away in a distant corner of the mind. You do not have that luxury. Every time you raise a cup, you remember that time is limited. Some things that once seemed important no longer deserve your energy. Long grudges begin to look foolish. Harsh words feel less satisfying when you remember you might never see that person again. Small kindnesses suddenly matter more. A shared piece of bread, a joke in the kitchen, a moment of sunlight in a cold corridor. The court physician, Dr. Benetti, occasionally lends you books, not only medical works, but also philosophy. Through them you encounter Stoic ideas. Focus on what is in your power. Accept what is not. You cannot forbid someone to plan an assassination, but you can decide how carefully you perform your duty. You cannot control how long you will live, but you can control what kind of person you are while you are alive. These thoughts have practical consequences. Your own closeness to danger makes you more attentive to the safety of others. You find yourself warning a kitchen worker not to leave food too long by an open door, not just because of poison, but because of spoilage. You gently slow down gossip that could ruin someone's position if repeated in the wrong ear. These are small acts, but they feel more meaningful than some of the grand speeches you hear in the Great Hall. There are days when all this collapses. Days when neither prayer nor philosophy nor blessed herbs seem to help. You are simply tired. Tired of wondering whether this plate, this cup, this bite is the one that will turn on you. On those days, you are not seeking deep answers. You simply move from task to task, following the routine as if it were a rope in the dark, trusting that your emotions will catch up later. In those moments, it is not big ideas that keep you going, but people. The shared prayer with other servants before a major feast. The priest who, seeing your expression, does not offer a lecture but quietly says, "I will remember you in my prayers." Maria in the kitchen who hands you a fresh roll, just because, even though you are not the one going hungry. These gestures contain a kind of warmth no treatise can provide. Slowly you realize that meaning is not something you discover once and for all, like a hidden treasure. It is something you assemble from many pieces. How you treat others, how you face fear, what stories you tell yourself about your own life. Yes, you are a food taster at court. Yes, your job is to meet danger first. But you are also a person who loves, worries, laughs, hesitates, and still walks into the hall when called. Religion, superstition, philosophy, and personal choice turn out not to be rivals, but layers. Official faith gives you words for prayer and a framework for hope. Superstitions give your anxious mind familiar handles in a world of uncertainty. Philosophy gives structure to your thoughts. Personal experience and relationships give warmth and weight to your days. You continue to stand by the table, not because you have solved every question, but because you have learned to live without complete answers. In a way, that becomes your answer, to live each day so that, if it does turn out to be your last, you would not be ashamed of the person you were while you held that cup in your hand. Your work as a food taster places you in a category of people whose labor involves constant physical danger. But you are not alone in facing risk as part of earning a living. Renaissance society creates many professions where death is not an unfortunate accident, but a predictable occupational hazard. Understanding how your experience compares to other dangerous work helps you see both what is unique about your position and what is shared across different forms of risky labor. Soldiers represent perhaps the most obvious comparison. They face violent death as a routine part of their profession. A soldier in the Duke's Guard, or in one of the mercenary companies that fight Italy's endless wars, knows that any campaign might be his last. Battle can come suddenly, and when it does, survival depends on skill, luck, and the actions of comrades around you. Yet soldiers face their danger in ways fundamentally different from yours. Combat happens in specific times and places. A soldier marches to war, knowing he will face danger, then returns to relatively greater safety between campaigns. The risk is intense but episodic. You face danger 3 times daily, every single day, with no campaigning season or safe intervals. Your war never ends, though it rarely produces the dramatic violence of an actual battlefield. Soldiers also benefit from camaraderie and shared purpose that partially compensates for danger. They train together, fight together, and develop bonds based on mutual dependence. When one soldier faces an enemy, his companions stand beside him. You stand alone before each potentially poisoned cup. No one can share the risk or take it for you. The isolation of your danger makes it psychologically harder to bear than risks faced collectively. The economic comparison also differs. Soldiers, especially successful mercenary captains, can become wealthy through plunder and payment for victories. A soldier who survives enough campaigns might retire comfortably. Your work offers steady wages, but no opportunity for the dramatic gains that make military service attractive despite its dangers. You risk as much for far less potential reward. Miners work in conditions that kill regularly and predictably. The men who dig for silver, copper, and other metals in the mountains labor in tunnels that can collapse without warning, trapping or crushing everyone inside. They breathe air filled with dust that slowly destroys lungs even when accidents do not kill immediately. Flooding, hidden pockets of bad air, and rockfalls create constant danger. Like you, miners face danger as a routine part of daily work rather than in dramatic episodes. Every shift underground could be the one that does not end with a return to the surface. This psychological similarity makes you feel kinship with these workers you have never met. Both of you trade increments of life expectancy for wages, dying slowly or suddenly, depending on the specific hazard encountered. But miners at least understand the nature of their risk. A collapsing tunnel is a comprehensible danger. You can see bad timbers, hear warning groans in the rock, recognize dangerous conditions. Your danger is invisible, tasteless, potentially present in anything you consume. The miner knows where the danger lives. You must assume it could be anywhere. The pay comparison is interesting. Miners in productive operations sometimes earn decent wages because their labor extracts valuable materials. Yet many work in conditions close to forced labor, especially when mining is used as punishment for criminals. Your position in a ducal palace grants you higher status than most miners, though you might envy their ability to see and sometimes avoid the threats they face. Sailors on merchant vessels and naval ships face dangers that combine elements of both military service and mining. The sea can kill suddenly through storms, shipwrecks, or armed attacks. It can also kill slowly through disease, malnutrition, and the accumulated wear of harsh conditions. A sailor's life expectancy is notoriously short, with many dying before age 30 from one cause or another. The sailor's experience parallels yours in the constancy of risk. Every day at sea involves some probability of death, just as every meal you taste carries some risk of poison. Neither of you can simply avoid the dangerous situation without abandoning your livelihood entirely. The work and the danger are inseparable. Sailors at least have the compensation of travel, seeing distant ports and experiencing adventures that most people never encounter. Your work confines you to palace walls, and the same routine repeated endlessly. The sailor's danger comes with variety and wide horizons. Yours comes with repetition and confinement. Which is worse depends on temperament, but you sometimes think the monotony makes your danger harder to bear. Construction workers building the great cathedrals, palaces, and fortifications of the Renaissance face immediate physical danger. Working on scaffolding high above the ground, they can fall to their deaths from one misstep or careless moment. Heavy stones and timbers can crush workers when ropes break or supports fail. The work demands strength, skill, and constant vigilance. A construction worker's danger is visible and immediate. You can see the height, judge the stability of scaffolding, recognize when weather makes work more dangerous. This visibility allows for informed risk assessment. You evaluate danger through methods that feel more like guessing than measuring. The construction worker knows roughly how much danger he faces today. You never truly know. Yet construction work, despite its dangers, produces something tangible and permanent. The worker who helps build a cathedral can point to it years later with pride, knowing his labor created beauty that will last centuries. Your work produces nothing visible. Your success is measured in negative terms. The Duke continues living. Nothing dramatic happens. Another day passes without incident. There is no cathedral to point to, only a series of meals that failed to kill anyone. Physicians and surgeons in your era face danger from the diseases they treat. A doctor attending to plague victims risks infection himself. Those performing operations risk contracting illnesses from patients. Medical practitioners die regularly from occupational exposure to sickness. The physician's risk resembles yours in involving invisible threats that can kill through simple contact or proximity. Both of you face dangers that cannot be seen or fully controlled. Both of you serve others by placing yourselves between them and harm, though the physician does so from education and calling while you do so from economic necessity. But the physician enjoys respect, learning, and social status that elevate his position far above yours. His dangerous work is understood as noble service rather than desperate employment. When a physician dies from disease contracted while treating patients, people speak of sacrifice. If you die from poison, you will be remembered mainly as proof that the plot was real. Those who carry out executions and judicial punishments work in professions that expose them to different kinds of danger. The physical risk to them is usually modest, as their work happens under controlled official conditions. But they face social death and spiritual danger. Society requires their services, but despises them personally. They often cannot attend church services with others or live in normal neighborhoods. Their work marks them in ways that never completely fade. Your work shares some of this social ambiguity. You are necessary, but not quite respectable. People acknowledge your service, but would not boast of having a food taster in the family. Yet you escape the full isolation these officials endure. Your work, while strange and unsettling, does not require you to directly harm others. You are the one who may be harmed, not the one who applies harm. Wet nurses who feed infants in wealthy households face a curious parallel to your position. They use their bodies as tools serving others' needs, accepting physical risk for wages. Wet nurses can contract diseases from the infants they feed or pass illnesses to them. They experience physical strain from continuous nursing. Like you, they stand between a wealthy person and a physical need, their body serving as the medium of safety or danger. The wet nurse at least experiences the positive side of sustaining life and forming bonds with children. Your work has no such gentle compensation. You stand between the Duke and death, but form no real connection with him. He hardly acknowledges your existence, except at the brief moment when you perform your function. The wet nurse, in some sense, becomes part of a family. You remain always on the edge of the room. The comparison that troubles you most is with test animals used by alchemists and physicians. Small creatures are sometimes given suspect substances, so their reactions can be observed before humans are exposed. These animals have no choice in their role and no understanding of what is happening. They simply experience the procedure and either survive or do not, depending on what entered their bodies. You are not exactly a test animal, but the parallel is uncomfortable. Like them, your body serves as a testing ground for substances that might be harmful. Like them, you have limited real choice about participating in this role, as economic desperation rather than direct force draws you into this work. Like them, you are considered an acceptable loss if something goes wrong on the way to protecting someone more important. The main difference is that you are fully aware of your position, and sometimes you are not sure whether that awareness is a gift or an extra cruelty. Across all these dangerous professions, certain patterns emerge. Those who face danger voluntarily, out of calling or desire for adventure, tend to find more meaning in their risk than those driven by hunger and lack of options. Those who confront danger together with others endure it better than those who face it alone. Those whose dangerous work leaves visible achievements or brings clear respect bear it more easily than those whose contribution stays hidden or ambiguous. Your position as food taster combines many of the harsher aspects of dangerous work. Economic necessity, not passion, brought you here. You face your danger alone rather than with companions sharing the same risk at the same moment. Your work produces no lasting object, only an absence of disaster. Your status is neither fully honored nor entirely low. You hover in a strange middle space. Yet you have advantages other dangerous workers lack. You work indoors, protected from storms and winter winds. You sleep in a private room instead of a crowded barracks, ship's hold, or miner's shed. You eat better and more regularly than most soldiers, sailors, or laborers. You face danger in repeated small doses, rather than one great storm of risk that might end everything in an hour. Seeing your life alongside these other lives does not cancel your fear, but it gives it context. You are not uniquely cursed, nor uniquely blessed. You are one of many people whose survival is balanced every day against the needs and ambitions of others. Perhaps the closest kin to your role are all the human shields the world quietly creates. Bodyguards who place themselves between a weapon and their patron, messengers sent into war zones, couriers carrying secrets that could cost them their lives. All of you exist so that someone else does not have to face certain risks directly. Your presence absorbs the first impact of danger. Understanding this brings a strange, sober dignity. Your work may be invisible, but it is not meaningless. You belong to that long, quiet line of people whose lives were the first line of defense in struggles they did not start and will not finish. Throughout history, poison has been associated with women in ways that reveal deep cultural anxieties about power, gender, and hidden threats. As you perform your work protecting the Duke from poisoning, you cannot help but notice how often suspicion falls on women, how many poisoning stories feature female conspirators, and how society views poison as somehow a feminine weapon. Understanding this gendered dimension of poison helps explain some of the dynamics you observe in the palace. The association between women and poison is ancient, stretching back to classical mythology and literature. Medea, the sorceress from Greek legend, used poison to harm her romantic rival and her own children in revenge against Jason. Circe transformed men into animals through potions and drugs. The idea that women possess secret knowledge of herbs and toxic substances runs through countless stories across cultures. Renaissance society inherits and reinforces these associations. Poison is seen as a woman's weapon, partly because it operates through deception rather than open confrontation. A woman in this era cannot challenge a man to a duel or lead an army into battle. Direct physical violence is coded as masculine. But poison works through cunning, patience, and access to domestic spaces like kitchens and bedchambers, where women traditionally hold more influence than in public political arenas. The most famous poisoning family in recent Italian history prominently features women. Lucretia Borgia, daughter of Pope Alexander VI and sister to Cesare Borgia, became legendary for her supposed poisoning skills. Stories claim she wore a hollow ring that could release poison into a victim's drink with a simple gesture. Whether these specific tales are true matters less than the fact that people believe them readily, accepting that a powerful woman would naturally turn to poison as her weapon of choice. Caterina de' Medici, who became Queen of France, brought her Florentine knowledge of poisons and antidotes to the French court. She allegedly maintained a cabinet of poisons and employed Italian specialists in toxic substances. Her political enemies accused her of poisoning multiple rivals, though solid evidence was scarce. Again, the readiness to believe these accusations reveals assumptions about how women in power operate. The reasons for associating women with poison go beyond simple mythology. Women in Renaissance society had limited access to legitimate power. They could not hold most official positions, could not vote in political decisions, and faced severe restrictions on their economic and social autonomy. Yet they still had interests to protect and ambitions to pursue. Poison offered a way to exercise power while working within the constraints society imposed. Access to kitchens and domestic spaces gave women opportunities to poison that men often lacked. A wife who wanted to eliminate her husband, a servant who wished to harm her mistress's rival, a noblewoman seeking to remove a political obstacle, all could potentially act through contaminating food or drink. The domestic realm where women spent most of their time was also where poison could most easily be introduced. Knowledge of herbs and medicinal plants traditionally fell within women's domain. Women prepared household medicines, treated common ailments, and maintained herb gardens. This legitimate knowledge of plants and their effects provided the foundation for understanding toxic substances as well. The line between healing and harming with plants was simply a matter of dose and intent. A woman skilled in herbal medicine possessed most of the knowledge needed to become a poisoner. Yet viewing poison primarily as a woman's weapon creates dangerous distortions. A historical record shows that men poisoned as frequently as women, perhaps more so. Male physicians, alchemists, and political conspirators used poison regularly. The Borgia family's most active poisoner was probably Cesare, not his sister Lucretia. Professional assassins and conspiracy organizers were overwhelmingly male. The gendered stereotype persists partly because it serves ideological purposes. It allows society to view women as inherently duplicitous and dangerous, while simultaneously denying them access to legitimate power. It creates fear of women, while justifying restrictions on their autonomy. If women are naturally inclined to poisoning, the logic goes, and they must be carefully controlled and monitored. In the palace where you work, these gender dynamics play out in subtle ways. When the recent poisoning incident was investigated, suspicion initially fell on a kitchen servant girl from the countryside. She was questioned more harshly than male servants in equivalent positions, based largely on assumptions that a young woman might have been seduced or coerced by conspirators, specifically because women are seen as more vulnerable to manipulation and more willing to use poison. The actual poisoning appears to have involved primarily male conspirators. The cupbearer who handled the contaminated wine was male. The wine supplier under investigation was male. Yet the investigators still spent considerable time examining the backgrounds of women in the household, looking for connections to rival families or suspicious relationships that might indicate poisoning plots. Female food tasters exist, but are extremely rare. You have heard of perhaps 3 or 4 cases in various Italian courts where women served in this role. Always they worked for female rulers who preferred to trust only women in their immediate personal service after experiencing betrayals by men. The duchess who employed a female taster for 12 years was remarkable for her commitment to this unusual arrangement. The rarity of female food tasters reflects broader patterns about women and danger in this society. Women are assumed to be skilled with poison, but also assumed to be physically weak and emotionally unstable in ways that make them unsuitable for roles requiring constant vigilance and courage. The contradiction is obvious, but rarely acknowledged. Women are dangerous enough to fear, but too weak to employ in protecting against the very dangers they supposedly represent. Your observations in the palace suggest that women's actual relationship to poison is more complicated than stereotypes allow. The female servants you interact with, Maria in the kitchen, laundry workers, chambermaids, show no particular interest in or knowledge of toxic substances. They work hard at their legitimate duties and seem no more inclined to conspiracy than male servants. When poisoning plots do involve women, it is usually through coercion rather than initiative. A conspirator might threaten a servant girl's family to force her cooperation, or promise marriage or financial security to seduce her into helping. Women's vulnerable position in society makes them targets for recruitment by conspirators who need inside access. But this reflects women's weakness, not their natural affinity for poison. The stereotype also ignores the reality that women often have more to lose from poisoning than to gain. A woman caught or even suspected of poisoning faces not just execution, but complete destruction of her reputation, and often her entire family's position. The risk calculation rarely favors women attempting to poison their way to power or security. The few who did try often failed and suffered terribly as examples to others. Yet certain historical cases do show women using poison in circumstances where other options were completely closed to them. Historical records occasionally show women in impossible situations, trapped by laws that offered no legal escape from dangerous marriages or unwanted unions, turning to desperate measures. These tragic cases reflected the severe constraints women faced in that era, rather than any natural female inclination toward such methods. They reveal more about the cruelty of limited options than about gender and violence. The medical and alchemical understanding of poison in your era also has gendered dimensions. Male physicians and alchemists produce most of the written knowledge about toxic substances. They claim rational, scientific understanding as opposed to the supposedly intuitive, mysterious knowledge of wise women and folk healers. Yet in practice, the village healers and midwives often have more reliable practical knowledge than the university-trained physicians with their classical theories. This creates a double standard where women's knowledge of plants and remedies is valued when it serves others' needs, but condemned as witchcraft when it threatens established power. The same herbalist who treats a sick child safely might face accusations of poisoning if a powerful person dies, mysteriously nearby. Women's medicinal knowledge becomes suspicious precisely because it works, because it gives women a form of power that makes authorities uncomfortable. The palace physician Dr. Benetti, despite his education, sometimes consults with local women known for herbal expertise. He does this quietly, unwilling to publicly acknowledge that unlettered women might know things his books do not teach. He then takes their knowledge and presents it as his own discovery. This appropriation of women's knowledge, while simultaneously fearing and restricting women themselves, characterizes much of Renaissance medical culture. In your role as food taster, you sometimes wonder how the job would differ if you were a woman. Would people trust your judgment as much? Would the Duke feel as protected by a female taster? Or would anxiety about women and poison make him more nervous rather than less? The handful of historical examples suggest that female tasters had to work harder to prove their loyalty and competence, facing extra scrutiny that male tasters rarely encountered. The cultural association between women and poison also affects how poison itself is perceived. Poison is seen as a cowardly, dishonorable weapon partly because it is associated with women and the domestic sphere rather than with masculine military valor. A death by sword in battle is honorable. A death by poison is shameful. This gendered coding of different types of violence serves to maintain social hierarchies where masculine forms of violence remain legitimate, while feminine forms are absolutely condemned. Yet from the victim's perspective, death is death regardless of the gender of the killer or the method employed. The Duke you serve would be equally dead, whether poisoned by a woman or stabbed by a man. The gendered morality surrounding violence serves social and political purposes, but has little to do with the actual experience of those who suffer from it. Your growing understanding of how poison intersects with gender helps you see patterns in palace politics more clearly. When powerful women are involved in any dispute, poison accusations follow almost automatically, even without evidence. This weaponization of gender stereotypes becomes a political tool used against women who accumulate too much influence. The accusation alone damages reputation and constrains power. You also notice that women in the palace, precisely because they are under suspicion, often become the most careful about food safety. Female servants tend to follow protocols more rigorously than male ones, aware that any incident will fall on them with particular severity. This ironic result means that in practice, women's involvement in food preparation sometimes makes it safer rather than more dangerous. As you continue your work, you try to see past the cultural stereotypes to the reality of how people actually behave. Some women are dangerous, some are not. The same is true of men. Poison is a tool that can be used by anyone with knowledge, access, and motivation. Gender matters less than circumstances, personality, and opportunity. Yet you cannot entirely escape the cultural framework you inhabit. When a new female servant joins the kitchen staff, you find yourself watching her more carefully than you watched the last male servant who was hired. When the Duchess visits and brings her lady attendants, you feel extra tension around those meals. The stereotypes shape your perceptions even as your reason tells you they are exaggerated and misleading. The relationship between women and poison in Renaissance society ultimately tells you more about gender anxiety than about actual poisoning patterns. Society fears women's hidden power, their access to intimate spaces, their knowledge of substances that heal and harm. Poison becomes a symbol for all these fears, a way to express deep cultural unease about women's potential to disrupt male authority through means that cannot be easily controlled or predicted. Understanding this does not make you safer as a food taster, but it makes you wiser about the social world you navigate. The real dangers you face come from political conspiracies that involve both men and women in various roles. But the cultural stories about poison and gender shape how those conspiracies are understood, investigated, and remembered. You live at the intersection of actual risk and cultural mythology, and both affect your daily reality in ways you cannot completely separate. Evening settles over Florence once again. The cathedral bells ring the hour as you make your way through the familiar corridors toward the Duke's dining hall. Your hand touches the antidote vial at your chest, a gesture that has become as automatic as breathing. The wooden cross around your neck catches the candlelight. Your feet know every stone in this path. Tonight's banquet will be like hundreds before it. Nobles will gather, musicians will play, servants will move through shadows, carrying dishes that you must taste first. The Duke will barely glance your way. The danger will be invisible or absent. You can never quite know which. And tomorrow, you will wake and do this all again. You have survived more meals than you once thought possible. You have learned things about poison, politics, fear, and survival that no book could teach. You have made a few genuine friends in a world where friendship is difficult. You have found meaning in work that seemed meaningless, and dignity in a role that appears undignified. The door to the great hall opens before you. Warm light spills out. The sound of conversation and laughter reaches your ears. Somewhere in that room, on a table laden with food, a goblet of wine waits for you. It might be perfectly safe. It might contain your death. The only way to know is to lift it to your lips and drink. You take a breath. You step forward. This is who you are now, the person who tastes first, who stands in the space between poison and power, who carries fear and courage in the same body. The work is not finished. It may never be finished. But tonight, like every night, you will perform your duty. Because someone has to go first into the unknown. Someone has to take the risk that protects others. Someone has to be willing to meet danger so that the feast can continue. Tonight, as always, that someone is you.